When struggling single dad Marcus accidentally picked up the wrong child from daycare, he had no idea that one tearful phone call would transform his family's life forever. Before we dive into the full story, don't forget to subscribe, because tomorrow we have an extra special story, and leave a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from. We'd love to hear your story too. The fluorescent lights of the downtown office building buzzed overhead as Marcus Rivera pushed his janitorial cart down the empty hallway, his shoulders aching from another 12-hour shift. At 32, he looked older than his years, the weight of single parenthood and financial struggle etched in the lines around his dark eyes. The cheap digital watch on his wrist read 5:47 p.m., and panic shot through his chest like ice water. The daycare closed at 6 sharp, and Mrs. Henderson had already warned parents twice this month about late pickup fees, $20 he simply couldn't afford. "Damn it," he muttered under his breath, abandoning his cart in the supply closet with less care than usual. His supervisor wouldn't be happy about the half-finished third floor, but Sophia came first. She always came first, even when it meant risking the job that barely kept their tiny apartment above the laundromat. Marcus's work boots echoed against the marble floors as he jogged toward the elevator, his mind calculating the fastest route through downtown traffic. 18 minutes if the lights cooperated. 25 if they didn't. The elevator seemed to descend in slow motion, each floor tick increasing his anxiety. At the parking garage, his 15-year-old Honda Civic coughed to life on the third try, the engine making the worrying, rattling sound that meant another expensive repair loomed in their uncertain future. The drive through downtown Austin became a blur of honking horns and aggressive lane changes as Marcus wove through traffic with the desperate efficiency of someone for whom being late meant consequences he couldn't afford. His hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, knuckles white against the worn leather. The radio crackled with traffic reports, but he barely heard them over the sound of his own racing heartbeat. Sophia had been at Sunshine Daycare for 8 months now, ever since Marcus had finally saved enough for the deposit and first month's payment. Before that, she'd stayed with their elderly neighbor, Mrs. Gutierrez, a kind woman whose failing eyesight and increasing confusion had made the arrangement untenable. The daycare wasn't ideal, understaffed and overcrowded, but it was licensed, affordable, and most importantly, it allowed Marcus to work both his janitorial job and his evening Uber shifts without worrying about his daughter's safety. The memory of dropping Sophia off that morning flashed through his mind, her small hand in his, her pink backpack bouncing against her shoulders as she skipped through the doorway. She'd been excited about show and tell, clutching the framed photo of her mother that she'd insisted on bringing. "I want to tell everyone about Mama," she'd said with the innocent earnestness of a 4-year-old who didn't fully understand why Mama wouldn't be coming home anymore. Marcus blinked hard, pushing away the familiar ache that always accompanied thoughts of Maria. 18 months since the cancer had taken her, and he still sometimes reached for her side of the bed in the mornings, still saved funny stories about Sophia to tell her when he got home. Still felt like he was failing at this single-parent thing, despite his desperate efforts to hold everything together. The daycare center sat in a converted house in an older residential neighborhood, its cheerful yellow paint and playground equipment a stark contrast to the strip clubs and check-cashing stores that dominated their part of town. Marcus pulled into the small parking lot at 5:56, his heart still pounding from the mad dash across the city. 4 minutes to spare, but barely. Inside, the controlled chaos of pickup time was in full swing. Children gathered backpacks and art projects, while parents chatted with teachers and each other, most looking far more composed than Marcus felt. The walls were covered with finger paintings and construction paper crafts, and the air smelled of disinfectant mixed with the lingering aroma of whatever had been served for afternoon snack. "Mr. Rivera," called out Miss Jessica, one of the younger teachers, as she spotted him near the entrance. "Sophia's in the back room with the other late pickups." She made the most beautiful drawing of a butterfly today. Marcus nodded gratefully, making his way through the maze of tiny chairs and abandoned toys toward the back of the building. His work uniform navy blue polo shirt with Pinnacle Cleaning Services embroidered on the chest felt shabby among the business suits and yoga attire of the other parents, But he'd long ago stopped caring about such things. What mattered was getting to Sophia, getting home, and figuring out dinner from whatever remained in their increasingly bare refrigerator. The back room housed about 8 children whose parents, like Marcus, were cutting it close to the 6 o'clock deadline. Most were absorbed in books or quiet games, supervised by Mrs. Chen, the daycare's assistant director, who looked up with a welcoming smile as Marcus entered. "Right on time," she said warmly. "They've been very good today." Marcus scanned the room quickly, his eyes landing on a small figure in the corner with dark hair and pigtails, wearing a pink shirt he recognized. Relief flooded through him as he approached what he assumed was Sophia, who was intently coloring in a princess coloring book. "Hey, baby girl," he said softly, crouching down beside her. "Ready to go home?" The child looked up, and Marcus felt a moment of confusion. The face was similar dark eyes, olive skin, about the right age, but something seemed slightly off, different. Before he could process this feeling fully, the little girl nodded and began gathering her things with the automatic efficiency of a child accustomed to daycare routines. "Did you have a good day?" Marcus asked, as he helped her with her backpack, the nagging sense that something wasn't quite right growing stronger. But exhaustion clouded his judgment, and the pressing need to get home, figure out dinner, and prepare for his evening Uber shift pushed the doubt aside. "It was okay," the little girl replied quietly, her voice smaller than Sophia's usual enthusiastic chatter. "We played with blocks." Marcus attributed her subdued demeanor to tiredness. Sophia often got quiet when she was tired, especially lately. The trauma of losing her mother had manifested in various ways, and her teachers had warned him that behavioral changes were normal and expected. Some days she was her usual spirited self. Other days she retreated inward, processing emotions too complex for her young mind to fully comprehend. They made their way to the front desk where Marcus signed the pickup sheet, scribbling his signature without really looking at the page. Mrs. Henderson, the daycare director, was handling phone calls and paperwork, barely glancing up as they passed. The afternoon pickup routine was so familiar, so automatic, that no one noticed the small discrepancy unfolding. In the parking lot, Marcus helped the child into Sophia's booster seat, still feeling that nagging wrongness but unable to pinpoint its source. The little girl buckled herself in with practiced ease, staring out the window as Marcus started the car. Usually, Sophia would be chattering about her day, asking about his work, requesting specific songs on the radio. This unusual quiet should have been a red flag, but Marcus was too exhausted, too focused on the logistics of their evening to pay proper attention. The drive home took 15 minutes through increasingly run-down neighborhoods until they reached the 3-story building that housed Rivera's laundromat on the ground floor and cheap apartments above. Marcus parked in the narrow alley behind the building, gathering work papers and the child's backpack as they climbed the exterior stairs to their second-floor unit. Their apartment was small but clean, a living room that doubled as Marcus's office, one bedroom they shared, and a kitchenette barely large enough for 2 people. Marcus had tried to make it homey with Sophia's artwork taped to the walls and pictures of Maria scattered throughout, but the space felt cramped and temporary, a landing pad between crises rather than a true home. "Go wash your hands," Marcus instructed automatically as they entered, dropping his keys on the counter and immediately moving to check their mailbox contents bills, mostly, that he'd sort through later with his usual mixture of dread and determination. When he looked up from the stack of envelopes, the little girl was standing in the doorway to the bathroom, looking around the apartment with an expression of confusion that Marcus finally registered as significant. "Where are we?" she asked, her voice carrying a tremor of uncertainty that made Marcus's stomach clench. "We're home, sweetheart," Marcus replied, kneeling to her level. "Are you feeling okay?" The child's dark eyes filled with tears that threatened to spill over. "This isn't my house," she said, her voice growing smaller. "Where's my mommy? I want Mommy Victoria." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Mommy Victoria. Not Mama, not Mommy, Mommy Victoria. And suddenly, looking at this little girl with fresh eyes, he saw all the differences he'd been too tired and stressed to notice. Her hair was straighter than Sophia's tight curls. Her face was rounder, her skin a different shade. Even her clothes, which he'd recognized as Sophia's pink shirt, he now realized was a different pink shirt entirely. "Oh God," Marcus breathed, his mind racing through the implications. "Oh God, you're not Sophia." The little girl nodded solemnly, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks. "I'm Emma," she said. "Emma Chen. Where's Mommy Victoria? She always picks me up." Marcus felt his legs give out slightly, forcing him to sit down hard on their second-hand couch. Emma Chen. He frantically tried to remember if he'd ever heard that name at the daycare. But the parent-teacher interactions were usually brief, focused on Sophia's day rather than getting to know other families. How had this happened? How had he picked up the wrong child, and where was Sophia? His hands shaking, Marcus pulled out his phone and dialed the daycare's main number. It rang 4 times before Mrs. Henderson answered, her voice already carrying the tired edge of someone eager to close up for the day. "Sunshine Daycare, this is Mrs. Henderson." "Mrs. Henderson, this is Marcus Rivera, Sophia's dad. I think there's been a mistake. I picked up the wrong child today." There was a pause, followed by the sound of papers shuffling. "I'm sorry, Mr. Rivera, what did you say?" "I have a little girl named Emma Chen with me instead of my daughter Sophia. I think I picked up the wrong child at pickup time." The silence on the other end stretched for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds. Then, Mrs. Henderson's voice returned, tight with barely controlled panic. "Mr. Rivera, please hold on. One moment." Marcus could hear muffled conversations in the background, voices raised in urgent discussion. Emma had stopped crying but remained standing uncertainly in the middle of their small living room, looking around at the unfamiliar surroundings with the wide-eyed wariness of a child in a strange place. "I'm sorry," Marcus said to her gently. "There was a mix-up. We're going to call your mommy right now and get you home, okay?" Emma nodded, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. "Is Sophia okay?" she asked, her concern for his daughter touching Marcus despite his own rising panic. "I'm sure she's fine," Marcus assured her, hoping desperately that this was true. Mrs. Henderson returned to the phone, her voice carefully controlled, but unable to hide the underlying stress. "Mr. Rivera, I need to ask you to please stay where you are. We're contacting Emma's mother right now. This is highly unusual. Our pickup procedures are specifically designed to prevent this kind of mistake." "Where is Sophia?" Marcus demanded, his parental instincts overriding any concern for the daycare's procedures or reputation. "Who has my daughter?" "Sophia left with Mrs. Chen about 20 minutes ago." "Mrs. Chen? She didn't realize it wasn't Emma either. We're calling her immediately." Marcus closed his eyes, trying to process this information. Somewhere across the city, his 4-year-old daughter was with a complete stranger, probably as confused and scared as Emma was right now. The thought made him feel sick. "What's Mrs. Chen's number?" Marcus asked. "I need to call her directly." "I can't give out parent contact information, Mr. Rivera. That's our policy. But I've already left her a voicemail, and I'm trying her office number now. She works downtown, so she might still be in meetings." Downtown. That was a 20-minute drive from the daycare, maybe more in evening traffic. Marcus felt his anxiety ratchet up another notch. "This is unacceptable," he said, his voice sharper than he'd intended. "My daughter is with a stranger because your daycare can't keep track of which child belongs to which parent. Mr. Rivera, I understand your concern, and I assure you we're doing everything possible to resolve this situation quickly. Both children are safe, and—" Marcus's phone buzzed with an incoming call, unknown number with a local area code. "Mrs. Henderson, I'm getting another call. This might be her." "Please, call me back as soon as you've spoken with Mrs. Chen," Mrs. Henderson said quickly before Marcus switched to the incoming call. "Hello?" Marcus answered, his heart pounding. "Is this Marcus Rivera?" The voice was female, professional, sounding, but with an edge of barely contained worry. "I believe you have my daughter." "Yes. Emma's here with me. Where's Sophia? Is she okay?" "Sophia's fine. She's right here with me. She's asking for her daddy, and seems confused about why she's in my car. I'm Victoria Chen, Emma's mother. I think we need to meet immediately to exchange the girls." Marcus felt a wave of relief so intense it nearly buckled his knees. Sophia was safe. That was all that mattered right now. "Where do you want to meet?" he asked, already moving toward the door. "I'm still downtown, but I can drive toward you. Where are you located?" Marcus gave her their address, then paused. "Mrs. Chen, I'm so sorry about this. I don't know how it happened. I was running late, and I was tired, and—" "Please, don't apologize," Victoria Chen interrupted, her voice warmer now. "I made the same mistake. I was distracted by work calls, and Sophia looks so much like Emma from behind. When she got in my car, I didn't realize until we were halfway to my house and she started asking for someone named Marcus instead of Mommy." Despite the stress of the situation, Marcus felt a small spark of gratitude that this woman, this stranger who had his daughter, seemed understanding rather than accusatory. "I'll meet you halfway," Marcus offered. "There's a shopping center on Riverside Drive, about 15 minutes from downtown. The one with the big Target?" "Riverside Plaza?" "Yes, I know it. I can be there in 20 minutes. Emma and I will leave now." After ending the call, Marcus turned to Emma, who had been listening to his side of the conversation with the intense focus of a child trying to understand adult concerns that affected her directly. "Good news," he told her with a smile he hoped looked more confident than he felt. "We're going to meet your mommy and get you back to her. And I'll get Sophia back too." Emma nodded solemnly. "Will you be in trouble?" she asked, her concern for his well-being surprising him. "No, sweetheart. It was just a mistake. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes too." The drive to Riverside Plaza felt simultaneously endless and too short. Marcus found himself studying Emma in the rear-view mirror, noting all the differences he should have seen immediately: the way she sat quieter than Sophia usually did, her different mannerisms, even the way she held her head. How had he been so blind? The exhaustion was no excuse for failing to recognize that this wasn't his own daughter. Emma seemed to sense his self-recrimination. "It's okay," she said quietly from the back seat. "You're nice, and your house smells like my grandma's house." Marcus felt his throat tighten unexpectedly. "Thank you, Emma. You've been very brave today." The shopping center parking lot was busy with evening shoppers, families loading groceries and teenagers gathering near the food court entrance. Marcus parked near the Target entrance, easily visible from multiple directions, and waited with Emma, who had grown quiet again as the reality of the strange day caught up with her. At exactly 6:47, a sleek black SUV pulled into the parking space across from them. Through the windshield, Marcus could see a woman in what appeared to be professional attire, and beside her, a small figure with familiar curly hair. "There's Mommy," Emma exclaimed, her whole demeanor brightening as she spotted the SUV. Marcus got out first, going around to help Emma from her booster seat. As he lifted her down, the SUV's doors opened, and Sophia came running toward them with the unconstrained joy of a 4-year-old reunited with her parent. "Daddy!" she shouted, launching herself into his arms with enough force to nearly knock him backward. "I was with a nice lady, but I wanted you." Marcus held his daughter tightly, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo and feeling the last of his panic finally subside. She was here, she was safe, she was his again. "I was worried about you, baby girl," he murmured into her hair. "I wasn't scared," Sophia announced with 4-year-old bravado. "Mrs. Victoria was nice and she has a pretty car. But I told her you always pick me up." Over Sophia's head, Marcus looked up to see Victoria Chen approaching. She was tall, probably around his age, with shoulder-length black hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to being in charge. Her business suit looked expensive, and even her casual approach across a parking lot carried an air of confidence that spoke of success and authority. "Emma, sweetheart," Victoria said, opening her arms as her daughter ran to her. "Mommy, the nice man took care of me. He has pictures of his wife everywhere, and his house smells good." Victoria lifted Emma easily, settling her on her hip before turning to Marcus with an expression of mixed relief and curiosity. Mr. Rivera, I presume? Marcus, he corrected, shifting Sophia to his other arm. And thank you for taking care of Sophia. I can't imagine how confusing this must have been for both of them. They handled it better than we did, I think, Victoria said with a slight smile. Sophia's been telling me all about her butterfly drawing and how you work in a tall building and drive people around in your car at night. Marcus felt heat creep up his neck. Through a 4-year-old's eyes, his janitorial work and Uber driving probably sounded more impressive than it felt, but Victoria's tone carried no judgment, only mild amusement. She likes to talk, Marcus said, bouncing Sophia gently. Sometimes, too much. I think it's charming. Emma's usually the quiet one, but Sophia had her laughing within 10 minutes. The two children were already gravitating toward each other again, and Marcus set Sophia down so she could properly reunite with Emma. They immediately began comparing notes about their unexpected adventure, their voices overlapping in the way that only small children could manage. I should probably ask, Victoria said, lowering her voice slightly, how something like this happens. I mean, the daycare has procedures, sign-out sheets, ID requirements. Marcus ran a hand through his hair, feeling the weight of his exhaustion and the day's near disaster settling on his shoulders. I was running late from work, rushing, tired. I saw a little girl with dark hair and a pink shirt sitting where the late pickups usually wait, and I just assumed. I should have looked more carefully, but honestly, I was just focused on getting there before they closed. Victoria nodded thoughtfully. I did the same thing. I had back-to-back conference calls until 5:30, rushed over there, and saw Emma's backpack and hair ribbon on a child sitting in the pickup area. I was so distracted by work that I didn't really look at her face until we were almost to my house. There was something in her tone that suggested self-recrimination similar to his own, and Marcus felt an unexpected kinship with this clearly successful woman who had made the same mistake he had. The important thing is, everyone's safe, Marcus said. Absolutely. Victoria shifted Emma to her other hip, then seemed to hesitate before continuing. I hope you don't mind me asking, but Sophia mentioned that her mother, that she lives with just you? Marcus felt the familiar tightness in his chest that always accompanied questions about Maria. My wife died last year. Cancer. It's just Sophia and me now. Victoria's expression immediately shifted to one of genuine sympathy. I'm so sorry. That must be incredibly difficult. We're managing, Marcus replied, the automatic response he'd perfected for these situations. It was easier than explaining the reality. The constant fear of financial ruin, the exhaustion of working multiple jobs, the daily worry that he wasn't enough for Sophia on his own. Emma's father isn't in the picture either, Victoria said quietly. Different circumstances, but I understand the single-parent thing. It's not easy. Before Marcus could respond, Sophia tugged on his pants leg, demanding attention. Daddy, can Emma come to our house sometime? She said she wants to see my butterfly drawing. Emma nodded enthusiastically. And Sophia wants to see my room. I have a big toy kitchen. The two adults exchanged glances over their daughters' heads, both clearly recognizing the social complexity that had just been introduced to an already strange situation. That's very sweet, Victoria said diplomatically. But we'll have to see about scheduling. Marcus appreciated her tact. The last thing he needed was Sophia getting attached to playmates whose families moved in circles far above their own economic reality. One look at Victoria's car, her clothes, her general bearing suggested a lifestyle that would make his shabby apartment and constant financial stress painfully obvious. We should probably get going, Marcus said, gently deflecting. It's been a long day for everyone. Victoria nodded, but something in her expression suggested she was processing more than just the evening's events. Of course, Emma, say goodbye to Sophia and Mr. Marcus. The girls hugged with the intensity of 4-year-olds who had shared an adventure, promising each other with the confidence of children that they would see each other again soon. Thank you again, Marcus said, as they prepared to return to their respective vehicles, for taking such good care of Sophia. She took care of me too, in a way. Victoria replied, settling Emma into her car seat. "It's been a long time since I've seen the world through a 4-year-old's eyes. Sophia has quite an imagination." As they drove away in opposite directions, Marcus caught Sophia's reflection in the rearview mirror. She was staring out the window thoughtfully, processing the day's events in the way children do. "Daddy," she said after several minutes of unusual quiet, "why don't we have a car like Mrs. Victoria's?" The question, innocent and curious rather than accusatory, still hit Marcus like a small punch to the stomach. How did you explain economic disparity to a 4-year-old? How did you tell your daughter that some people had more because life was unfair, because circumstances differed, because her father wasn't successful enough to provide the things other families took for granted? "Different families have different kinds of cars," Marcus replied carefully. "Our car gets us where we need to go, and that's what matters." Sophia accepted this explanation with the resilience of a child who had learned not to ask for things that weren't possible. It was a lesson Marcus wished she didn't have to learn so young, but one that circumstances had forced upon both of them. As they pulled into the alley behind their building, Marcus's phone buzzed with a text message. He waited until they were upstairs, and Sophia was settled with her coloring books before checking it. The message was from an unknown number. "This is Victoria Chen. I got your number from the Daycare emergency contact list. I wanted to make sure you and Sophia got home safely, and to thank you again for taking such good care of Emma today. I know this was stressful for everyone involved." Marcus stared at the text for several moments, unsure how to respond. The polite thing would be to reply with similar sentiments, but something about the day's events, about Victoria's kindness and lack of judgment, made him want to say more than social convention required. Finally, he typed back, "We're home safe, thank you. Emma was wonderful company, and Sophia hasn't stopped talking about her new friend. I hope Emma wasn't too upset by the whole mix-up." The response came quickly. "She's fine. Actually asking when she can see Sophia again. Kids are remarkably resilient." Marcus found himself smiling despite the exhaustion that was beginning to catch up with him. "They are. Sophia's been asking the same thing." There was a longer pause before the next message arrived. "I know this might sound strange, but would you be interested in getting the girls together sometime soon? They clearly connected, and Emma doesn't have many friends her age." Marcus stared at the text, uncertainty warring with an unexpected hope in his chest. Sophia did need friends, especially friends who could help her process the social aspects of being 4 in a complex world. But he also worried about the differences between their lives, about Sophia seeing things she couldn't have, about his own ability to navigate social situations with someone from Victoria's obviously different economic stratum. Before he could overthink it completely, he typed back, "Sophia would love that. We could meet at a playground or somewhere neutral." "Actually," came the quick reply, "I was thinking more along the lines of dinner. Nothing fancy, just pizza or something kid-friendly. Emma's been asking about Sophia's butterfly drawing, and I'd like to hear more about how you managed to keep her so calm during what must have been a very confusing situation." Marcus felt his heart rate increase slightly. A dinner invitation from a successful businesswoman who had seen his shabby apartment and knew about his work situation. It could be simple parental networking, or it could be something else entirely. Either way, it represented a connection to a world he'd never imagined accessing, an opportunity for Sophia to expand her social circle beyond their small, struggling community. "That sounds nice," he replied, then added, "Are you sure? I mean, we don't really know each other." The response came with what Marcus imagined might be a laugh behind it. "We know each other well enough to have accidentally trusted each other with our children for several hours. That's got to count for something." As Marcus prepared dinner and helped Sophia with her bedtime routine, he found himself thinking about the strange turns that had led to this moment. A simple mistake, the kind of mix-up that happened when exhausted parents moved through familiar routines on autopilot, had somehow opened a door to possibilities he couldn't yet fully envision. While Sophia brushed her teeth, chattering about Emma and her new friend's house and toys, Marcus wondered if maybe, just maybe, The day's confusion had been leading toward something better than either of them could have planned. Sometimes, he thought as he tucked Sophia into bed and listened to her excited whispers about seeing Emma again, the most important changes begin with the smallest mistakes. The family restaurant Victoria had suggested sat in a middle-ground neighborhood between Marcus's working-class area and the upscale district where she likely lived. Gino's Pizza had been a local institution for 30 years, with red checkered tablecloths, vintage Italian movie posters on the walls, and the kind of comfortable atmosphere where children could be children without drawing disapproving glances from other patrons. Marcus arrived first, having left work early from his afternoon shift and picked up Sophia with time to spare for once. He'd changed out of his cleaning uniform into his best jeans and a button-down shirt that had seen better days but was clean and pressed. Sophia wore her favorite purple dress, the one with tiny flowers that Maria had bought her for Easter the year before she died. It was getting too small, but Sophia refused to let him donate it, and Marcus couldn't bring himself to insist. They were seated at a corner booth where Sophia immediately began arranging the crayons the hostess had provided, her tongue poking out slightly in concentration as she selected the perfect colors for the children's menu coloring page. Marcus watched her work, still marveling at how quickly she'd bounced back from yesterday's confusion. Children possessed a resilience that adults seemed to lose somewhere along the way. "Daddy, do you think Emma likes to color?" Sophia asked, not looking up from her careful work on a cartoon pizza slice. "I'm sure she does. Most kids your age love to color. Maybe we can color together. I could teach her how to stay inside the lines." Marcus smiled at his daughter's unconscious confidence in her artistic abilities. Sophia had always been meticulous with details, whether arranging her stuffed animals or completing puzzles designed for older children. He wondered sometimes if she'd inherited that precision from him, from the engineering mind that he'd pushed aside when life demanded different priorities. At exactly 6 o'clock, Victoria entered the restaurant with Emma in tow. Marcus felt a moment of self-consciousness as he watched her scan the dining room. Even dressed casually in dark jeans and a cream-colored sweater, she carried herself with the unmistakable bearing of someone accustomed to being in charge. Her hair was pulled back in a neat ponytail, and her minimal makeup somehow made her look both approachable and polished. Emma spotted Sophia immediately and waved enthusiastically, pulling her mother toward their table with the single-minded determination of a 4-year-old on a mission. "Sophia," Emma called out as they approached, "I brought my butterfly stickers to show you." "I have butterfly stickers too," Sophia replied, scooting over to make room in the booth. "And I finished my butterfly picture from school." Victoria slid into the seat across from Marcus, offering him a smile that seemed genuinely warm despite the slight uncertainty in her eyes. "Thank you for meeting us here. I hope this place is okay." Emma picked it from 3 options I gave her. "It's perfect," Marcus assured her, meaning it. The restaurant felt comfortable, unpretentious, somewhere he could relax without worrying about Sophia's volume level or table manners. Sophia loves pizza, and she's been talking about seeing Emma again all day. The 2 girls were already deep in conversation, comparing sticker collections and planning collaborative coloring projects. Their easy friendship provided a natural buffer against the slight awkwardness that lingered between the adults who were still essentially strangers thrown together by circumstance. "How was work today?" Victoria asked as they settled in. "I hope yesterday's chaos didn't cause any problems for you." Marcus appreciated that she remembered his work situation, though he wondered how much Sophia had told her during their unexpected time together. "It was fine. My supervisor wasn't thrilled that I left early yesterday, but I explained the situation. Family emergencies happen." Victoria's expression shifted slightly, and Marcus caught something that might have been regret in her eyes. "I feel terrible that you might have gotten in trouble because of our mix-up. Is your job flexible with family situations?" The question was carefully phrased, but Marcus heard the underlying concern. She was trying to gauge whether he was in a precarious employment situation, whether yesterday's incident might have jeopardized his livelihood. It was a thoughtful question, and also one that highlighted the differences in their circumstances. People in Victoria's position probably didn't worry about losing their jobs over family emergencies. Not particularly flexible, but I've been there 8 months now, and they know I'm reliable. One early departure won't hurt me," Marcus replied, keeping his tone light despite the truth that any disruption to his work schedule created ripple effects he couldn't afford. The server approached, a teenage girl with purple hair who clearly recognized the restaurant's regulars. She greeted Emma by name and complimented Sophia's dress before taking their drink orders. Marcus noted the easy familiarity and realized this was probably a regular spot for Victoria and Emma, another small indication of the stability and routine that characterized their lives. "So," Victoria said once they'd ordered a large pizza to share, "I have to admit I'm curious about something. Yesterday, when Emma was telling me about her afternoon with you, she mentioned that you have pictures of your wife everywhere and that your house smells like her grandmother's. She was very observant about details that seemed to comfort her." Marcus felt the familiar tightness in his chest that always accompanied conversations about Maria, but something in Victoria's tone suggested genuine interest rather than idle curiosity. "Sophia needs those reminders. We both do. Maria died 18 months ago, and Sophia was barely 3. I want her to remember her mother, to feel connected to her." "That must be incredibly difficult," Victoria said quietly, glancing at Sophia, who was absorbed in explaining the finer points of butterfly anatomy to Emma. How do you manage it all?" The question was loaded with implications about single parenthood, grief, and the logistics of survival that Marcus wasn't sure he was ready to unpack with someone he barely knew. But something about Victoria's directness, combined with the safe buffer of their daughter's presence, made honesty seem like the better choice. "Some days better than others," he admitted. "Sophia's remarkably resilient, which helps. And we have routines, systems. It's not perfect, but we're getting by." Victoria nodded thoughtfully, twirling her water glass between her fingers. "Emma's father left when she was 2. Different situation, but I understand the single-parent challenge. Though I suspect my circumstances make it easier than yours." It was a tactful acknowledgement of their economic differences, offered without condescension or false equivalence. Marcus appreciated that she didn't pretend their struggles were identical while still finding common ground in their shared experience of raising daughters alone. "What kind of work do you do?" Marcus asked, genuinely curious about the source of her obvious success. "I'm a venture capitalist. I evaluate and invest in technology startups, primarily in the healthcare and environmental sectors. I also founded a company about 10 years ago that developed software for medical device integration. We sold it 3 years ago, which gave me the capital to start my investment fund." Marcus felt his eyebrows rise involuntarily. Victoria spoke about founding and selling a company with the casual tone most people use to describe changing jobs. The gulf between their professional achievements felt suddenly vast. "That sounds incredible," he said, meaning it. "Creating something from nothing and building it into something valuable enough to sell, that takes serious vision. And luck," Victoria added quickly. "Being in the right place at the right time with the right connections. The tech world can be very insular." Their pizza arrived, providing a natural break in the conversation as they helped the girls get settled with appropriately sized slices. Emma and Sophia continued their animated discussion about various topics, seamlessly moving from butterflies to favorite colors to the relative merits of different cartoon characters. "Sophia mentioned that you work in a tall building," Victoria said as they ate, her tone carefully neutral. "What kind of work do you do there?" Marcus felt heat creep up his neck. Through a 4-year-old's perspective, his janitorial work probably sounded more impressive than it was, but he wasn't about to lie or embellish. "I'm in building maintenance, janitorial services mostly. I work for a company that has contracts with several downtown office buildings." If Victoria was surprised or disappointed by this revelation, she hid it well. That must be steady work at least. Offices always need maintenance. "It is steady," Marcus agreed, appreciating that she didn't make him feel ashamed of honest work. "And I drive for Uber in the evenings, which gives me some flexibility with Sophia's schedule." Victoria's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "You work 2 jobs?" "Sometimes 3, depending on what's available. There's a construction company that calls me for weekend work when they need extra hands. Marcus kept his voice matter of fact, but he could see Victoria processing this information with what looked like growing concern. That must be exhausting. When do you sleep? Marcus shrugged, cutting Sophia's pizza into smaller pieces. You adapt. Sophia goes to bed at 8, so I can drive until midnight or 1, then be up for the day shift. It's not ideal, but it pays the bills. Most of them, he added quietly, realizing that partial honesty was probably worse than full disclosure. We're managing. Victoria set down her fork entirely, studying him with an expression that Marcus couldn't quite read. Can I ask you something that might be too personal? Marcus nodded, curious despite his apprehension about where this might lead. Yesterday, Emma said you fixed something at the daycare. She was very impressed, said you made the loud beeping stop and everyone was happy. What happened? Marcus felt surprised by the question. He'd barely thought about the incident Emma was referencing. Oh, that. The security system at the daycare was malfunctioning when I got there. The entry sensor was throwing error codes, making this awful beeping sound that was clearly bothering the kids. I just looked at it for a minute, saw that someone had bumped the wiring connection loose and plugged it back in properly. Just like that? Victoria's voice carried a note of interest that seemed disproportionate to such a simple fix. It wasn't complicated. Basic electrical troubleshooting. Anyone with a little technical knowledge could have figured it out. Victoria leaned forward slightly. Marcus, I've been in tech for 15 years. I've seen trained professionals struggle with much simpler problems than a security system malfunction. What you're describing isn't basic knowledge for most people. Marcus felt uncomfortable with the attention, unsure where Victoria was heading with this line of questioning. I guess I've always been good with mechanical things, electrical systems. It's not a big deal. Where did you learn that? Do you have technical training? The question hit closer to the heart of Marcus's carefully maintained composure than he was prepared for. His engineering degree felt like a relic from another life, a reminder of paths not taken and ambitions sacrificed to more pressing needs. I have a degree in aerospace engineering, he said quietly, not looking up from his pizza. From UT, graduated 8 years ago. The silence that followed was heavy with implications. Marcus could feel Victoria staring at him, could sense her mental recalibration as she processed this information. An aerospace engineer working as a janitor and Uber driver. The obvious question hung in the air between them. What happened? Victoria asked gently. Marcus glanced at Sophia, who was still happily engaged with Emma, building elaborate stories around their pizza crusts that involved princesses and dragons. His daughter had no idea that her father had once designed components for satellites, had once had a career trajectory that pointed toward NASA contracts and cutting-edge aerospace technology. Maria got sick 3 years after I graduated, Marcus said finally. Ovarian cancer. Aggressive. The treatments were expensive, experimental. Insurance covered some of it, but not nearly enough. I burned through our savings in the first 6 months, then started borrowing against everything we owned. He took a sip of his water, buying time to organize thoughts he rarely spoke aloud. The aerospace industry isn't particularly accommodating to employees who need flexible schedules for medical emergencies. When Maria's treatments required her to travel to specialists in different cities, I was taking too much time off, missing deadlines. I could see my career stalling, but I couldn't abandon her to preserve my professional reputation. Victoria nodded, her expression soft with understanding. So you made a choice. I made the only choice that mattered, Marcus corrected. I left the engineering firm, took a job with a medical equipment company that offered better health insurance and more flexible scheduling. It paid less, but it meant I could be with Maria for her treatments, could take care of Sophia when Maria was too sick to function. And after Maria died? Marcus felt his throat tighten. The medical debt was crushing. Even with insurance, we owed over $200,000. The medical equipment company downsized 6 months after Maria's funeral, and I was laid off. By then, I'd been out of aerospace for 2 years. My skills were outdated, my professional network had moved on. I applied for engineering positions, but no one wanted to hire someone with a gap in their resume and no current industry connections. He looked up to meet Victoria's eyes, seeing sympathy there but also something else. Recognition, perhaps. Understanding of how quickly circumstances could derail even the most carefully planned life. So I started taking whatever work I could find that offered steady income and health insurance. Turns out, building maintenance uses a lot of the same problem-solving skills as engineering, just applied to different systems. And Uber driving pays cash, which helps when you're behind on everything and can't wait for bi-weekly paychecks. Victoria was quiet for several moments, apparently processing this information. Marcus wondered if she was recalculating her assessment of him, whether his engineering background made him more worthy of her time or just made his current circumstances seem more tragic. "That's an incredible sacrifice," she said finally. "And an incredible loss. I mean, obviously Maria's death was the real loss, but to have to give up your career, your calling on top of everything else." Marcus shrugged, uncomfortable with being seen as heroic for doing what any decent husband and father would do. "It was temporary, I thought. I figured once Sophia was older, once the debt was more manageable, I could find a way back into engineering, maybe not aerospace, but something technical." "Do you still want that? To get back into engineering?" The question caught Marcus off guard. He'd been so focused on daily survival, on making rent and keeping Sophia fed and clothed, that long-term career planning felt like a luxury he couldn't afford. "I think about it sometimes," he admitted. "But realistically, I've been out too long now. Technology moves fast, especially in aerospace. What I knew 8 years ago is probably obsolete. And I can't afford to take time off work to update my skills or pursue additional certifications." "What if you could?" Victoria asked suddenly. "Hypothetically, if the financial pressure weren't an issue, what would you want to do?" Marcus felt a flutter of something dangerous, maybe, or possibility that he quickly pushed down. Hypothetical questions were dangerous when your reality was as precarious as his. "I used to design water reclamation systems for long-duration space missions," he said, allowing himself to remember briefly. "Finding ways to maximize efficiency in closed-loop systems, to extract every possible molecule of usable water from waste streams. It was fascinating work, technically challenging." "That sounds like it would have applications beyond aerospace," Victoria observed. "It does. Water purification, environmental remediation, disaster relief systems, but those fields are dominated by huge engineering firms with government contracts. Not exactly accessible to someone in my current position." Victoria nodded thoughtfully, but Marcus could see her mind working, processing information in ways he couldn't predict. Before she could respond, Emma announced loudly that she needed to use the bathroom, providing a natural break in their increasingly heavy conversation. As Victoria helped Emma navigate the restaurant's restroom, Marcus found himself alone with Sophia, who looked up at him with the perceptive eyes that sometimes made him forget she was only 4. "Daddy, do you like Mrs. Victoria?" she asked with the directness that children wielded like a superpower. "She seems very nice," Marcus replied carefully. "Do you like Emma?" "She's my best friend now," Sophia declared with the absolute certainty of childhood friendship. "She knows lots of words I don't know, and she's really good at sharing. Can we have playdates with her?" The innocent question highlighted Marcus's growing anxiety about where this newfound connection might lead. Sophia was already attached to Emma, already imagining a friendship that might not be sustainable given their different circumstances. What happened when Victoria realized that maintaining a relationship with their family meant exposing Emma to apartment living above a laundromat, to the reality of food stamps and past due notices? "We'll see, baby girl," Marcus said, the standard parental response that bought time without making promises he might not be able to keep. When Victoria and Emma returned, the conversation shifted to lighter topics: the girls' plans for kindergarten, favorite books, upcoming holidays. But Marcus could feel something had changed in the dynamic between him and Victoria. She studied him with increased interest, asked follow-up questions about his work experiences that seemed to go beyond polite conversation. As they prepared to leave, Victoria helping Emma gather her scattered stickers while Marcus dealt with Sophia's inevitable protests about leaving her new friend, Victoria made a suggestion that surprised him. "I know this might sound presumptuous," she said, "but I'd like to continue this conversation sometime, without the girls, so we can talk more freely about career stuff. Would you be interested in having coffee this week?" Marcus felt his heart rate increase slightly. A one-on-one meeting with Victoria felt like crossing into territory he wasn't sure he was ready to navigate. But something in her tone suggested this wasn't purely social. "I work most days," he said carefully, "but I could probably manage coffee in the late afternoon, before my evening shift. Thursday around 4? There's a place called Meridian Coffee near downtown that's usually quiet in the afternoons." Marcus nodded, though he wasn't entirely sure what he was agreeing to. As they said their goodbyes and the girls made elaborate plans to see each other again soon, Victoria touched his arm lightly. "Marcus, I hope you don't mind me saying this, but I think you're selling yourself short. 8 years isn't that long in engineering terms, especially for someone with your problem-solving instincts. Don't write off your possibilities too quickly." As Marcus and Sophia drove home through the evening traffic, his daughter chattering excitedly about her new friend and their plans for future adventures, Marcus found himself thinking about Victoria's parting words. He'd spent 3 years convincing himself that his engineering career was over, that his current circumstances were permanent. But Victoria saw possibilities where he saw only obstacles. The question was whether those possibilities were real or whether he was allowing himself to hope for things that remained beyond his reach. Hope, Marcus had learned, could be as dangerous as despair when you were living on such narrow margins for error. But as Sophia fell asleep in her booster seat, her small hand clutching the butterfly sticker Emma had given her, Marcus allowed himself to imagine, just for a moment, what it might feel like to have choices again. What it might mean to use his mind for something more challenging than troubleshooting broken security systems and calculating the most efficient routes through evening traffic. Thursday afternoon couldn't come fast enough, and Marcus found himself both anticipating and dreading whatever Victoria wanted to discuss. Something told him their conversation would either open doors he'd thought were permanently closed or force him to confront just how far he'd fallen from his original dreams. Either way, his life was about to become more complicated than simply surviving each day had prepared him for. Meridian Coffee occupied the ground floor of a converted warehouse in East Austin. Its exposed brick walls and industrial lighting, creating the kind of atmosphere that attracted freelancers with laptops and entrepreneurs plotting their next ventures. Marcus arrived 10 minutes early, partly from habit and partly from nerves, choosing a table near the window where he could watch the street while waiting for Victoria. The coffee shop felt like foreign territory to someone whose caffeine usually came from gas station convenience stores or the break room vending machine at work. The menu board displayed prices that made Marcus wince. $8 for a specialty latte was more than he typically spent on lunch. He ordered a plain black coffee and claimed his table, checking his phone to confirm he had enough time before his evening Uber shift began. At exactly 4 o'clock, Victoria entered wearing dark jeans and a cream-colored blazer that looked effortlessly professional. She spotted Marcus immediately, offering a wave as she approached the counter to order. Marcus watched her interact with the barista, noting the easy confidence that seemed to characterize everything she did. Even ordering coffee, she projected the kind of self-assurance that came from never having to worry about whether you could afford what you wanted. "Thank you for meeting me," Victoria said as she settled into the chair across from him, cradling an elaborate coffee drink topped with foam art. "I hope this place is okay. I know it's a bit trendy, but they have good Wi-Fi and it's usually quiet enough for actual conversation." "It's fine," Marcus assured her, though he felt slightly out of place among the clientele of young professionals and creative types. "Thank you for suggesting it." Victoria studied him for a moment, and Marcus had the uncomfortable feeling that she was seeing more than he intended to reveal. His work clothes, khakis, and a polo shirt that had seen better days felt shabby in this environment, and he found himself sitting straighter, trying to project more confidence than he felt. "I've been thinking about our conversation the other night," Victoria began. about your engineering background and your current situation. I hope you don't mind, but I did some research on water reclamation systems for aerospace applications. It's fascinating work." Marcus felt his eyebrows rise. "You researched my old field?" "I'm a venture capitalist. Research is what I do." Victoria smiled, taking a sip of her coffee. "I wanted to understand what kind of expertise you're talking about when you say you designed water systems for space missions." Turns out, it's incredibly complex. Cutting-edge technology that most people couldn't even conceptualize, let alone design. The compliment made Marcus uncomfortable. He'd spent 3 years defining himself by his current circumstances rather than his past achievements, and Victoria's perspective felt dangerously close to hope. "It was interesting work," he said carefully, "but that was a long time ago. Technology moves fast in aerospace." "Not as fast as you might think," Victoria countered. "The fundamental principles of closed-loop water systems don't change dramatically. The applications do, but the core engineering challenges remain pretty consistent." Marcus found himself curious despite his caution. "What kind of applications are you thinking about?" "Water scarcity, environmental cleanup, disaster relief. The same efficiency principles that work in space could revolutionize how we approach water purification on Earth, especially in developing countries or areas affected by natural disasters." As Victoria spoke, Marcus felt something stirring in his chest that he hadn't experienced in years. Intellectual engagement, the excitement of complex problem-solving that had originally drawn him to engineering. He pushed the feeling down, reminding himself that theoretical discussions didn't pay rent or put food on the table. "Those are huge markets, dominated by established companies with government contracts," Marcus said, "not exactly accessible to individual engineers." "Maybe not through traditional channels," Victoria agreed. "But the technology landscape is changing. There's increasing interest in innovative solutions from smaller, more agile companies, especially solutions that can be deployed quickly and cost-effectively." Marcus was quiet for a moment, processing Victoria's words while trying to understand her motivation for this conversation. Was she genuinely interested in his engineering background, or was this an elaborate form of networking? Either way, he found himself wanting to engage with the technical challenges she was describing. "The biggest obstacle with closed-loop water systems isn't the purification technology itself," Marcus said slowly, his engineer's mind beginning to work despite his caution. "It's creating systems that are efficient enough to be economically viable while being simple enough for non-technical users to maintain." Victoria leaned forward, her expression sharpening with interest. "Explain that." "Take a typical disaster relief scenario," Marcus continued, warming to the subject despite himself. "You need a system that can process contaminated water from any source: flood water, well water, even seawater in coastal areas. The purification technology exists, but most systems require trained technicians for operation and maintenance. In disaster zones, you don't have that luxury. So you need systems that are essentially foolproof," Victoria observed. "Exactly. And that's where the aerospace experience becomes relevant. In space, there's no technical support team. Systems have to work perfectly for months or years with minimal intervention. You have to design for reliability, simplicity, and efficiency simultaneously." Victoria nodded thoughtfully, making notes on her phone. "Have you ever thought about designing something like that? A simplified water purification system based on aerospace principles?" The question hit closer to Marcus's hidden dreams than Victoria could have known. He hesitated, weighing honesty against the vulnerability of revealing just how much he'd thought about exactly that problem. "Actually," he said finally, "I have been working on something like that. In my spare time, which admittedly isn't much." Victoria's coffee cup paused halfway to her lips. "You're developing a water purification system?" "It's not that formal," Marcus said quickly, already regretting the admission. "Just sketches, theoretical designs, nothing that could actually be built without significant resources." "Can I see it?" The request caught Marcus off guard. He'd never shown his water purification designs to anyone they felt too personal, too connected to memories and dreams. He usually kept buried. "I don't have anything with me," he said. "And honestly, it's pretty rough. Just notebook sketches and some basic calculations. I'd still like to see it sometime, if you're willing to share. I'm genuinely curious about your approach to the problem." Marcus felt a flutter of something between fear and excitement. Victoria's interest seemed genuine, but showing her his designs would mean revealing just how much of his mental energy went to projects that couldn't contribute to his family's immediate survival. "Can I ask you something?" Marcus said, deflecting slightly. "Why are you interested in this? You said you invest in healthcare and environmental technology, but surely you have access to engineers with current industry experience." Victoria set down her coffee, considering her answer carefully. "I do, but most of them think within established paradigms. They approach problems with incremental improvements to existing solutions. Sometimes the best innovations come from people who are forced to think differently, who don't have access to traditional resources and have to find creative alternatives." She paused, seeming to weigh her next words. "And, honestly, I was impressed by how you handled the situation with Emma. Not just your technical skills, but your judgment, your calmness under pressure. Those are rare qualities, especially combined with deep technical expertise." Marcus felt heat creep up his neck. Anyone could have figured out that security system fix. "No, they couldn't have," Victoria said firmly. "I watched the daycare staff struggle with that system for 15 minutes before you arrived. The maintenance company they called said they couldn't get someone out until the next day. You solved it in 30 seconds because you understood the underlying system architecture." The memory brought back something Marcus had tried to forget about that day. He'd been running late, stressed about pickup time, when he'd encountered Mrs. Henderson and two teachers clustered around the security panel near the entrance. The harsh beeping sound had been driving everyone crazy, and the children were clearly agitated by the noise. "We can't get it to stop," Mrs. Henderson had said when she spotted Marcus. "The security company says someone will be here tomorrow, but we can't leave it beeping all night." Marcus had glanced at the panel, immediately recognizing the error code pattern from similar systems he'd encountered during his building maintenance work. But more than that, he'd understood the logical architecture, the way the sensors communicated with the central processor, the hierarchical relationship between different system components. "Mind if I take a look?" he'd asked, already moving toward the panel. The fix had been simple once he'd traced the logical error pathway. A loose connection in the door sensor network was creating communication timeouts, which triggered the error cascade. Resetting the system and securing the connection had solved the immediate problem, but Marcus had also noticed a configuration setting that was causing unnecessary power drain. "Your backup battery is probably dying faster than it should," he'd told Mrs. Henderson after completing the fix. "This setting here is polling the sensors twice as often as necessary. If you change it to this value, your battery will last about 3 times longer." The grateful relief on Mrs. Henderson's face had been satisfaction enough, but Marcus realized now that Victoria had witnessed the entire interaction, had seen him diagnose and solve a problem that had stumped multiple other adults. "That really wasn't a big deal," Marcus insisted, returning to the present conversation. "It was to Emma," Victoria said. "She talked about it for 20 minutes in the car. Sophia's daddy is really smart, Mommy. He made the scary noise stop and everyone was happy." The idea that his problem-solving had impressed a 4-year-old was both touching and slightly absurd, but Marcus could see that Victoria was making a larger point about practical intelligence versus theoretical knowledge. "The thing is," Victoria continued, "I see a lot of technical presentations in my work. Brilliant engineers with impressive credentials who can explain complex theories but struggle with real-world implementation. You have the opposite problem. You're undervaluing practical skills that are actually quite rare." Marcus was quiet for several moments, processing Victoria's assessment while trying to maintain realistic expectations about his circumstances. Even if that's true, practical skills don't necessarily translate into business opportunities, especially for someone in my position. "What if they could?" Victoria asked. "Hypothetically, If you had access to development resources, could you build a prototype of your water purification system? The question felt dangerous, because Marcus had asked himself the same thing countless times during the long hours when he worked on his designs. Late at night, after Sophia was asleep and before he started his Uber shift, he would spread his notebooks across their small kitchen table and lose himself in calculations and sketches that felt like glimpses of a different life. The basic system, yes, Marcus said slowly. It would require some specialized components that aren't standard hardware store items, but nothing exotic. The real challenge would be field testing under different conditions. What kind of budget would you need for a working prototype? Marcus felt his pulse quicken. Victoria was asking specific questions, the kind that suggested more than casual interest. But he forced himself to remain cautious. Honestly, I've never calculated that, he admitted. I've been designing within theoretical constraints rather than real budget parameters. Could you calculate it? If I were to ask you to put together a development plan with actual numbers? The conversation had shifted into territory Marcus wasn't prepared to navigate. Victoria seemed to be suggesting something beyond intellectual curiosity, but he couldn't allow himself to believe that opportunities like this actually materialized for people in his circumstances. Victoria, he said carefully, I need to ask what you're thinking here. Are we talking about theoretical engineering discussions or something else? Victoria smiled, the expression both encouraging and slightly mysterious. I'm thinking about possibilities. But before we go any further down that road, I'd really like to see your actual designs. Would you be willing to show them to me? Marcus felt torn between excitement and terror. His water purification designs represented the most hopeful part of his current life, the part that connected his past expertise to potential future possibilities. But they also represented 3 years of work that might look amateur or impractical to someone with Victoria's business experience. They're pretty rough, he warned. Hand-drawn sketches, not professional CAD drawings. I'm not expecting polished presentations. I want to see how you think about problems, how you approach design challenges. Marcus checked his phone, calculating the time until his Uber shift. I could show you this weekend if you're serious about wanting to see them. Sophia and I don't have plans Saturday afternoon. I'm very serious, Victoria assured him. And Emma would love to see Sophia again. Maybe we could make it a playdate for the girls while we talk engineering. As they gathered their things to leave, Victoria touched Marcus's arm lightly. I know this probably feels strange, having someone you barely know show this kind of interest in your work. But I want you to know that my curiosity is genuine. I think you might be sitting on something more valuable than you realize. The drive home through afternoon traffic gave Marcus time to process the conversation and its implications. Victoria's interest felt real, but he'd learned to be wary of situations that seemed too good to be true. His experience with medical debt and job loss had taught him that hope could be as dangerous as despair when your survival depended on careful calculation of limited resources. That evening, as he drove for Uber through the familiar routes of downtown Austin, Marcus found his mind returning to Victoria's questions about development budgets and prototype construction. Despite his caution, he caught himself calculating component costs and fabrication requirements, sketching mental timelines for moving from theoretical design to working system. The water purification project had begun 3 years earlier, during Maria's final months, as a form of mental escape from the crushing reality of medical appointments and insurance battles. Maria had always been passionate about environmental issues, volunteering with water conservation groups and advocating for sustainable development projects. During her illness, when she was too weak for activism but still wanted to contribute to causes she cared about, she'd encouraged Marcus to channel his engineering skills toward environmental solutions. You could design something that really matters, she'd whispered one evening as they sat together in the hospital room, her hand thin and cold in his. Something that could help people who don't have clean water, who don't have the resources we take for granted. Marcus had started sketching that same night, sitting beside Maria's hospital bed while she slept fitfully under harsh fluorescent lights. The initial designs had been crude, but they'd given him something to focus on beyond the slow, inevitable process of losing the person he loved most. After Maria's death, the water purification project had become his connection to her memory and her values. Working on the designs felt like honoring her belief that engineering could be a force for good, that technical expertise carried responsibility to serve people who needed it most. The system Marcus had developed over 3 years of spare time work addressed what he saw as the fundamental limitation of existing water purification technology: complexity. Most advanced purification systems required trained operators, consistent power supplies, and regular maintenance by technical specialists. They worked well in controlled environments, but failed in the chaotic conditions where clean water was most desperately needed. Marcus's approach drew heavily from his aerospace experience with closed-loop life support systems. In space, reliability wasn't a preference; it was a matter of survival. Every component had to function perfectly for extended periods without expert intervention. Maintenance had to be simple enough for non-specialists to perform correctly under stress. Applying those principles to water purification meant designing systems that could operate independently for months, using any available water source, with maintenance procedures simple enough for community members to learn quickly. The technical challenges were immense, but they were exactly the kind of complex problem-solving that had originally drawn Marcus to engineering. The question Victoria had raised about development resources kept returning to Marcus's thoughts as he navigated evening traffic. He'd always assumed that moving from theoretical design to working prototype would require resources far beyond his reach, not just money, but access to fabrication facilities, testing equipment, and regulatory expertise. But Victoria seemed to be suggesting that such resources might be available, that his designs might have commercial potential he'd never seriously considered. The possibility was both thrilling and terrifying. Saturday afternoon arrived with the kind of crisp autumn weather that made Austin feel briefly temperate between the extremes of summer heat and winter unpredictability. Marcus had spent Friday evening organizing his design notebooks and sketches, trying to present his work in some logical order despite its evolution over 3 years of stolen moments between jobs and parenting responsibilities. Victoria and Emma arrived at their apartment complex precisely on time, Emma carrying a backpack full of art supplies she'd promised to share with Sophia. Marcus watched from their second-floor window as Victoria surveyed the building's exterior, taking in the combination laundromat, tire shop, and cheap apartments that characterized their neighborhood. "Mrs. Victoria!" Sophia called out as they climbed the exterior stairs, rushing to embrace Emma with the enthusiasm of a 4-year-old greeting her best friend. Victoria smiled warmly at the reunion, but Marcus caught her glancing around their apartment with what might have been surprise at how clean and organized the small space was. He'd spent the morning making sure everything was presentable, though he couldn't disguise the fundamental limitations of their circumstances. "Thank you for having us over," Victoria said, accepting the glass of water Marcus offered. "I hope it's okay that Emma brought enough art supplies for a small army. She's been planning this play date all week." The girls immediately claimed the living room floor for their artistic endeavors, spreading papers and crayons across the area rug Maria had chosen during happier times. Their chatter provided a comfortable background as Marcus gathered his design notebooks from the kitchen table. "Before I show you these," Marcus said, settling onto the couch beside Victoria, "I need to set expectations. This isn't professional documentation. It's 3 years of spare time sketching and thinking, mostly done late at night when I couldn't sleep." Victoria nodded encouragingly. "I understand. Show me what you've got." Marcus opened the first notebook, revealing pages of hand-drawn schematics intermixed with calculation notes and design iterations. The drawings were precise, despite being done by hand, each component carefully labeled and dimensioned. "This is the basic system architecture," Marcus began, pointing to a schematic that showed the relationship between different purification stages. "The core principle is modular redundancy, multiple independent processing units that can operate separately or in combination, depending on water source and required output volume." Victoria studied the drawing intently, tracing the flow pathways with her finger. "So if one module fails, the system continues operating? Exactly. And maintenance can be performed on individual modules without shutting down the entire system. Each module uses a different purification approach: filtration, UV sterilization, chemical treatment, so the system can adapt to different types of contamination. As Marcus explained his designs, he found himself remembering why he'd fallen in love with engineering in the first place. The intellectual satisfaction of solving complex problems, of finding elegant solutions to seemingly impossible challenges, flooded back with surprising intensity. "This is remarkable," Victoria said, after examining several pages of schematics. "The redundancy design is brilliant, but what really impresses me is the user interface concept. You've designed the operational controls to be completely intuitive." Marcus felt a flush of pride despite his attempt to maintain modest expectations. The interface was inspired by watching Sophia learn to use different electronic devices. 4-year-olds don't read instruction manuals, but they can figure out almost any device if the controls are logical and immediate. "So you designed a water purification system that could be operated by a 4-year-old? "Theoretically, yes. The goal was to make operations simple enough that community members could learn the basics in a single training session and teach others without formal technical education." Victoria flipped through more pages, examining calculations and component specifications with the focus of someone who understood technical documentation. "Have you tested any of these concepts? Even small-scale proof of concept?" Marcus hesitated before answering. "I built a miniature version of the filtration module last year, just for my own curiosity, to see if the flow dynamics worked the way I'd calculated. And it worked better than I expected, actually. The efficiency was about 12% higher than my theoretical calculations suggested." Victoria looked up from the notebook with obvious excitement. "You built a working prototype?" "A tiny one," Marcus clarified quickly. "It processes maybe a cup of water per hour, hardly industrial scale. But it proves the concept works. Do you still have it?" Marcus glanced toward the kitchen, where his prototype sat on a shelf above the refrigerator, disguised among other household items. "It's not much to look at." "Can I see it?" Marcus retrieved the device, which looked like a small plastic box with tubing connections and LED indicators. To casual observation, it might have been a humidifier or some other household appliance, but Victoria recognized its significance immediately. "This is incredible," she said, examining the compact unit. "How long did it take you to build this?" "About 6 months of weekend work. Most of the time was spent figuring out where to source components cheaply. Electronics suppliers don't usually sell single units to individuals, especially not at prices I could afford." Victoria looked up at Marcus with an expression of growing amazement. "You sourced components, fabricated housing, programmed control systems, and tested performance parameters, all on your own?" "It's not that complicated when you break it down into steps," Marcus said, though he could see that Victoria disagreed with his assessment. "Marcus, do you realize what you've accomplished here? You've independently developed and prototyped technology that could revolutionize disaster relief and development aid. Without funding, without institutional support, without access to professional fabrication facilities." The enthusiasm in Victoria's voice was infectious, but Marcus forced himself to maintain realistic perspective. "It's a long way from a prototype that processes a cup per hour to something that could actually serve communities in crisis." "Not as long as you might think," Victoria replied, her expression taking on the focused intensity Marcus was beginning to recognize as her business mode. "The hard part is proving the concept works. Scaling up is primarily an engineering and manufacturing challenge, and those are problems that money can solve." As the afternoon progressed and the girls played contentedly nearby, Victoria asked increasingly detailed questions about Marcus's designs, manufacturing requirements, and potential applications. Marcus found himself sketching new concepts on napkins, explaining technical challenges and possible solutions with the enthusiasm he hadn't felt since his aerospace days. When Victoria finally closed the last notebook, her expression was thoughtful and calculating. "Marcus, I want to propose something, but I need you to hear me out completely before you respond." Marcus felt his heart rate increase, sensing that Victoria was about to offer something that would either change his life or break his heart. "I think your water purification system has genuine commercial potential. More than that, I think it could address real humanitarian needs while being economically viable. I'd like to explore the possibility of helping you develop it properly." The words hung in the air between them while Marcus tried to process their implications. Victoria was talking about more than intellectual curiosity. She was suggesting actual business development, real investment in his work. "What would that look like?" Marcus asked carefully. "Honestly, I'm not sure yet, but I'd like to find out. Would you be willing to work with me to develop a proper business plan? To calculate real development costs and market potential?" Marcus glanced at Sophia, who was showing Emma how to draw butterflies with proper anatomical proportions, both girls completely absorbed in their artistic collaboration. His daughter deserved a future with possibilities beyond the narrow survival margins that currently define their lives. "Yes," Marcus said, the word emerging before his caution could override his hope. "I'd be willing to explore that." Victoria smiled, the expression carrying both excitement and determination. "Then let's see what we can build together." As Victoria and Emma prepared to leave that evening, Sophia clinging to her new friend with typical 4-year-old reluctance to end playdates, Victoria paused at the door. "Marcus, I know this probably feels overwhelming, but I want you to know that my interest is genuine and my resources are real. You've created something remarkable here, and you deserve the chance to see where it might lead." After they left, Marcus sat in his small living room, surrounded by the scattered notebooks and sketches that represented 3 years of hidden dreams. For the first time since Maria's death, the future felt like it might hold possibilities beyond simply surviving each day. The water purification system that had begun as a way to honor his wife's memory might actually become a path toward the kind of meaningful work she'd always believed he was capable of achieving. And perhaps, just perhaps, Sophia would grow up knowing her father as the engineer he'd once been, rather than the man who'd had to abandon his dreams to keep them afloat. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating, a reminder that sometimes the most important changes begin not with grand gestures, but with small connections that reveal hidden possibilities waiting to transform everything. The following Tuesday morning found Marcus completing his janitorial rounds with unusual efficiency, his mind preoccupied with the conversation he'd scheduled with Victoria for that afternoon. 3 days had passed since their Saturday meeting, and Victoria had called Monday evening with a proposition that both excited and unsettled him. "I'd like to have my technical team review your designs," she'd said, her voice carrying the crisp professionalism he was beginning to associate with her business mode. "With your permission, of course. I want to get independent verification of the system's potential before we discuss next steps." Marcus had agreed, though the idea of having his hand-drawn sketches scrutinized by professional engineers made his stomach clench with anxiety. What if his 3 years of spare-time work looked amateur to people with current industry experience? What if the isolation from formal engineering had led him to overlook fundamental flaws in his approach? Now, as he finished mopping the lobby of the downtown office building where he worked, Marcus checked his phone to confirm the timing. Victoria had arranged for him to meet with Dr. Sarah Kim, a water systems engineer who consulted for international development organizations, and James Rodriguez, a manufacturing specialist who evaluated production feasibility for emerging technologies. The meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. at Victoria's office, which gave Marcus just enough time to go home, change out of his work uniform, and drive across town. The address Victoria had provided led to a sleek glass building in Austin's tech corridor, the kind of modern architecture that housed successful startups and venture capital firms. Marcus felt his usual discomfort with environments that reminded him how far his circumstances had diverged from his original career trajectory, but he forced himself to focus on the opportunity rather than his insecurities. The elevator to the 15th floor opened onto a reception area that managed to feel both professional and welcoming, with natural light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows and carefully curated artwork that suggested success without ostentation. The receptionist, A young woman with short red hair and an easy smile greeted Marcus by name and directed him to a conference room where Victoria was waiting with two other people. "Marcus, thank you for coming," Victoria said, rising to greet him with the warmth that had characterized their personal interactions while maintaining the professional bearing appropriate to a business meeting. "I'd like you to meet Dr. Sarah Kim and James Rodriguez." Dr. Kim was a woman in her 40s with graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and the intense focus of someone accustomed to solving complex technical problems. James Rodriguez appeared younger, perhaps early 30s, with the kind of restless energy that suggested hands-on experience with manufacturing processes. Dr. Kim specializes in water systems for humanitarian applications, Victoria explained as they settled around the conference table. She's worked with UNICEF, Doctors Without Borders, and several other organizations implementing water purification in crisis zones. James evaluates manufacturing feasibility for technology startups, particularly those developing products for emerging markets. Marcus felt his anxiety increase as he realized the caliber of expertise Victoria had assembled. These weren't casual consultants, they were professionals whose opinions could legitimately assess the commercial viability of his work. "Before we begin," Victoria continued, "I want to emphasize that this review is confidential. Both Dr. Kim and James have signed non-disclosure agreements regarding your technology. Your intellectual property is protected regardless of our conclusions today." The reassurance helped somewhat, though Marcus still felt exposed as Victoria opened his design notebooks and spread his sketches across the conference table. 3 years of late-night work suddenly seemed vulnerable under the bright lights of professional scrutiny. "Marcus," Dr. Kim said, studying the first schematic with obvious interest, "Victoria tells me you've developed this system based on aerospace life support principles. Can you walk me through your core design philosophy?" Marcus took a deep breath, reminding himself that he understood his technology better than anyone else in the room, regardless of their credentials. The fundamental challenge with water purification in crisis situations is that existing systems assume stable operating conditions, consistent power, trained operators, regular maintenance schedules. But humanitarian crises are defined by instability. He pointed to the modular design illustrated in his sketches. "I approach this as a redundancy problem rather than a purification problem. Instead of building one complex system that does everything perfectly, I designed multiple simple systems that can work independently or cooperatively depending on conditions." James leaned forward, examining the component specifications. "So if one module fails, the others continue operating?" "Exactly. And each module uses a different purification approach, so the system can adapt to different types of contamination without requiring technical expertise to reconfigure." Dr. Kim nodded approvingly. "That's remarkably sophisticated thinking. Most engineers approach water purification as an optimization problem, how to make one system as efficient as possible. You're treating it as a resilience problem." Marcus felt a flutter of professional pride, despite his nervousness. Resilience was critical in aerospace applications. When you're 6 months from Earth, your life support systems can't have single points of failure. For the next hour, Dr. Kim and James asked increasingly detailed questions about Marcus's designs, manufacturing requirements, and operational parameters. Marcus found himself explaining technical decisions he'd made years earlier, defending design choices with logic he'd almost forgotten he possessed. "The user interface concept is particularly impressive," Dr. Kim observed, examining Marcus's sketches for the control system. "I've seen communities struggle with purification systems that require operators to interpret complex indicator lights or follow multi-step procedures. Your design appears genuinely foolproof." "I tested the interface logic on my daughter," Marcus admitted. "If a 4-year-old can understand the controls, then adults under stress should be able to operate the system without extensive training." James Rodriguez had been studying the manufacturing specifications with growing interest. "These component requirements are surprisingly straightforward," he said. "You've designed for manufacturability without sacrificing functionality. That's unusual for emerging technology. I had to work within realistic constraints, Marcus explained. I couldn't design systems that required exotic materials or precision machining that would make the technology prohibitively expensive. Victoria, who had remained mostly quiet during the technical discussion, made notes on her tablet while observing the interaction between Marcus and the two consultants. Marcus caught her eye occasionally and saw something that might have been satisfaction at how the conversation was progressing. "Doctor." Kim closed the notebook she'd been studying and looked directly at Marcus. "I need to ask you something bluntly. Have you calculated the potential impact of this technology if it were deployed at scale?" Marcus shook his head. "I've focused on technical feasibility rather than market analysis. I didn't have access to deployment data or cost models for large-scale implementation. James and I spent yesterday running some preliminary calculations based on your specifications, Dr. Kim continued. If your efficiency claims are accurate, this system could process clean water at roughly 60% of the cost of existing field-deployable technology, while requiring 90% less technical expertise to operate and maintain. The numbers hit Marcus like a physical impact. He'd known his system was efficient, but he'd never quantified the economic implications of that efficiency. "What does that mean in practical terms?" Marcus asked. James answered, his voice carrying obvious excitement. "It means your technology could make clean water accessible in situations where current solutions are either too expensive or too complex to implement effectively. Refugee camps, disaster zones, remote communities, anywhere that lacks infrastructure for conventional water treatment." Dr. Kim nodded agreement. "The global market for humanitarian water technology is estimated at about $8 billion annually, but that represents only current deployments using existing technology. If you could reduce costs and complexity significantly, you'd be addressing unmet demand that's probably twice that size." Marcus felt his head spinning as he tried to process the implications. "You're talking about billions of dollars in potential market value? We're talking about potentially saving millions of lives," Dr. Kim corrected gently. "The market value is secondary to the humanitarian impact. But yes, the commercial potential is substantial." Victoria spoke for the first time in several minutes. "Marcus, based on what Dr. Kim and James have reviewed today, I believe your technology could be developed into a commercially viable product with significant social impact. I'd like to propose a partnership to make that happen." The moment Marcus had been anticipating and dreading had arrived. Victoria was about to offer him something that could transform his life, and he wasn't sure he was prepared to evaluate it objectively. "What kind of partnership?" Marcus asked carefully. Victoria opened a folder and slid a document across the table. "I'm proposing that my investment fund provide development capital to build working prototypes, conduct field trials, and bring your technology to market. In exchange, we'd form a joint venture company with you as Chief Technology Officer and majority stakeholder." Marcus stared at the document without picking it up, suspicious of offers that seemed too generous to be realistic. "What's the catch?" Victoria smiled at his directness. "No catch, but significant commitment required from both sides. Development would take at least 2 years and require substantial funding, probably between $2 and $5 million, depending on the scope of field testing. You'd need to work full-time on the project, which means leaving your current jobs." The mention of leaving his janitorial work and Uber driving created immediate anxiety. "I can't afford to give up steady income for something that might not work." "The partnership agreement includes salary provisions," Victoria explained. "You'd be paid competitively for your engineering work while the technology is being developed." Marcus felt overwhelmed by the rapid progression from theoretical discussions to concrete business proposals. Part of him wanted to leap at the opportunity, but years of financial insecurity had made him deeply suspicious of situations that seemed too good to be true. "Victoria, I need to ask something directly," Marcus said, ignoring the presence of the two consultants. "Is this a business proposition or charity? Because I'm not interested in charity, no matter how well-intentioned." The bluntness of his question created an uncomfortable silence in the conference room. Dr. Kim and James exchanged glances, clearly recognizing the tension underlying Marcus's suspicion. Victoria's expression grew serious, and she leaned forward slightly. "Marcus, I understand why you'd be concerned about that. But this is absolutely a business proposition based on commercial potential, not philanthropic interest in your personal circumstances." "Then explain why you'd invest millions of dollars in technology developed by someone who's been out of professional engineering for 3 years. Victoria didn't hesitate. "Because you've solved a problem that established companies with unlimited resources haven't been able to solve. Because your approach is genuinely innovative rather than incrementally improved. And because Dr. Kim and James, who have no financial interest in flattering you, just confirmed that your technology could be worth hundreds of millions of dollars in the right market." James Rodriguez spoke up unexpectedly. "Marcus, if I may, I evaluate emerging technologies for a living. I see maybe 50 new concepts every year, most of them developed by teams with advanced degrees and substantial funding. Your work is easily in the top 5% of what I've reviewed, and it's the most practical solution to humanitarian water challenges I've ever encountered." Dr. Kim nodded agreement. "I've spent 15 years working with water systems in crisis zones. I know the limitations of existing technology intimately. Your system addresses every major operational constraint I've encountered in the field. If someone offered me the choice between your prototype and any existing field-deployable system, I'd choose yours without hesitation." The professional validation felt surreal to Marcus, who had spent 3 years thinking of his water purification work as an interesting hobby rather than commercially viable technology. But the praise made him even more suspicious of Victoria's motives. "If the technology is so valuable," Marcus said, "why offer me majority ownership? Why not just license the designs and develop them with your own engineering team?" Victoria's smile suggested she'd been expecting this question. "Because the technology isn't separate from the inventor. Your approach to problem solving, your understanding of user needs, your design philosophy, those are integral to the system's value. I could hire engineers to build devices based on your specifications, but they couldn't continue innovating in the same direction." She paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. "And, honestly, because I believe the best business outcomes happen when the people with the most expertise have the most control. You understand this technology better than anyone else ever will. You should own the majority of its value." Marcus felt his resistance wavering despite his determination to remain skeptical. Victoria's explanation sounded logical, but it also seemed almost too ethical for the business world he imagined venture capitalists inhabited. "What would my actual role be?" Marcus asked. "If I agreed to this partnership, what would I be doing day to day?" "Leading a team of engineers to develop production-ready versions of your prototypes," Victoria replied, "overseeing field trials with humanitarian organizations, working with manufacturing partners to optimize production processes. Essentially, being the chief technology officer of a startup focused on bringing your innovation to global markets." The description sounded like the kind of meaningful engineering work Marcus had dreamed about since graduate school, the opportunity to apply technical expertise to problems that genuinely mattered. But it also sounded impossibly distant from his current reality. "I need time to think about this," Marcus said finally. "This is a lot to process." "Of course," Victoria agreed immediately. "This is a major decision that would affect every aspect of your life. Take whatever time you need." Dr. Kim gathered her notes and looked at Marcus with obvious respect. "For what it's worth, I hope you decide to move forward with development. The world needs solutions like yours." James Rodriguez echoed the sentiment as they prepared to leave. "Marcus, I've seen a lot of interesting technology that never makes it to market because the inventors can't navigate the business development process. You have someone offering to handle that complexity while preserving your control over the technology. That's extraordinarily rare." After the consultants left, Marcus found himself alone with Victoria in the conference room, surrounded by his sketches and notebooks that suddenly felt heavy with possibility. "I know you're skeptical," Victoria said quietly. "I would be too, in your position. But I want you to know that my interest in your technology is completely separate from my concern for your personal situation." "How can it be separate?" Marcus asked. "You know I'm struggling financially. You know I'm desperate for opportunities. How do I know you're not just being generous to someone who needs help?" Victoria was quiet for several moments, apparently considering how to address his concern without causing offense. "Marcus, can I share something with you that might help explain my perspective?" Marcus nodded, curious despite his wariness. 5 years ago, I invested in a company developing solar panel technology. The founder was a Stanford PhD with venture capital connections and a perfectly polished business plan. The technology looked promising, the market analysis was thorough, and the development timeline seemed realistic. Victoria paused, staring out the conference room window at the Austin skyline. 2 years and $8 million later, we had a product that worked exactly as specified, but couldn't compete with existing solutions because the founder had optimized for technical elegance rather than practical deployment needs. The company failed because brilliant engineers working in isolation from real-world constraints had created something impressive but ultimately useless. She turned back to Marcus. "Your technology exists because you've been forced to solve real problems with limited resources. You've designed for actual user needs rather than theoretical optimization. That practical intelligence is worth more than advanced degrees and unlimited development budgets." Marcus felt some of his suspicion beginning to dissolve, replaced by a cautious recognition that Victoria's business logic made sense independent of any charitable impulses. "Besides," Victoria continued with a slight smile, "if I wanted to be charitable, there are much more efficient ways to help struggling families than investing millions of dollars in technology development. I could just write you a check, which would be cheaper and simpler for everyone involved." The observation was so pragmatic that Marcus found himself laughing despite his anxiety. "I guess that's true. Marcus, I'm offering you this partnership because I believe your technology could generate substantial returns for my investors while addressing genuine humanitarian needs. That's not charity, that's the best kind of business opportunity." As Marcus gathered his notebooks and prepared to leave Victoria's office, he felt overwhelmed by the collision between his carefully managed expectations and the possibilities Victoria was presenting. For 3 years, he'd focused on daily survival, on maintaining the minimum stability necessary to keep Sophia safe and fed. Long-term planning had felt like a luxury he couldn't afford. Now Victoria was asking him to imagine a future where his engineering expertise could provide not just survival, but genuine prosperity and meaningful work. The opportunity felt both too good to be true and too important to dismiss without careful consideration. "How long do I have to decide?" Marcus asked as they waited for the elevator. "As long as you need," Victoria replied. "Though I should mention that I'm planning to present this opportunity to my investment committee next month. If you're interested in moving forward, we'd need to start formal development planning fairly soon." The elevator arrived, and as they descended toward the parking garage, Marcus found himself studying Victoria's reflection in the polished steel doors. She appeared relaxed and confident, someone accustomed to making decisions that involved millions of dollars and the futures of multiple people. He wondered what it felt like to operate from that position of strength, to have resources sufficient to transform lives through business decisions. "Can I ask you something?" Marcus said as they reached the lobby. "What made you successful enough to make offers like this? What path led you to venture capital?" Victoria paused near the building entrance, considering the question. "Luck, timing, and obsessive focus on solving problems that mattered to me personally. I started my first company because I was frustrated with inefficiencies in medical device software that I encountered while my father was undergoing cancer treatment. Personal experience with systemic problems can be powerful motivation for innovation." The parallel to his own situation wasn't lost on Marcus. His water purification work had been inspired by Maria's environmental passions and motivated by his desire to honor her memory through meaningful contribution to causes she'd cared about. "The other thing," Victoria continued, "was recognizing that the best opportunities often come from unexpected directions. I learned to pay attention to solutions developed by people outside traditional industry channels. because they tend to approach problems differently. As Marcus drove home through afternoon traffic, his mind raced through the implications of Victoria's proposal. The partnership would mean leaving the security of steady paychecks for the uncertainty of startup development. It would mean trusting someone he'd known for less than 2 weeks with his family's financial stability. But it would also mean returning to engineering work that utilized his education and expertise, work that could potentially improve lives on a global scale. That evening, as Marcus helped Sophia with her homework at their small kitchen table, the same table where he developed his water purification design, she found himself seeing their apartment with new eyes. The cramped space, the second-hand furniture, the careful budgeting that defined their daily routines could all be temporary circumstances rather than permanent limitations. "Daddy, you look happy," Sophia observed, looking up from her coloring book. "Did something good happen at work today?" Marcus smiled at his daughter's perceptiveness. "Something interesting happened. I met with some people who think Daddy's engineering project might be able to help lots of people." Sophia's face brightened with the enthusiasm that characterized her approach to most of life's developments. "The water cleaning machine you work on after I go to bed?" Marcus felt surprised that Sophia had been aware of his late-night work sessions. "Yes, that project. They think it might be good enough to turn into a real business." "Would that mean you wouldn't have to clean buildings anymore?" Sophia asked, with the directness that children applied to practical questions. The innocent question highlighted the choice Marcus was facing. He could continue the exhausting routine of multiple jobs that barely covered their expenses, maintaining stability at the cost of any meaningful professional growth. Or he could risk that stability for the possibility of building something better not just for himself, but for Sophia's future. "Maybe," Marcus answered carefully. "It would be a big change, but it might mean Daddy could do engineering work again, like he did before Mama got sick." Sophia nodded solemnly, processing this information with the seriousness she brought to important topics. "Would we still live here?" "For now, yes. But maybe someday we could have a bigger place, with a yard where you could play outside." The thought of providing Sophia with the kind of childhood luxuries he'd always wanted to give her space, security, opportunities felt both tantalizingly close and impossibly distant. Victoria's proposition offered a path toward those possibilities, but it required trusting in outcomes he couldn't guarantee. That night, after Sophia was asleep, Marcus spread his design notebooks across the kitchen table once more and tried to see his work through the eyes of Dr. Kim and James Rodriguez. 3 years of spare time sketching and calculation suddenly felt like something more substantial. A foundation for technology that could genuinely impact global humanitarian efforts while providing economic security for his family. The water purification system that had begun as a way to honor Maria's memory and channel his grief into constructive work might actually become the bridge between his past expertise and a meaningful future. The possibility was both exhilarating and terrifying. A reminder that sometimes the most important decisions required choosing hope over fear, potential over security. As Marcus sat in the quiet apartment, surrounded by sketches that represented years of hidden dreams, he realized that Victoria's proposition wasn't just about business development or financial opportunity. It was about the chance to become the engineer and father he'd always wanted to be, to provide Sophia with a legacy of meaningful work rather than just survival. The decision still felt overwhelming, but for the first time in 3 years, Marcus allowed himself to believe that better outcomes might actually be possible. Tomorrow would bring another day of careful calculation and realistic assessment. But tonight, he could imagine a future where his technical expertise served purposes larger than keeping them housed and fed. Sometimes, Marcus thought as he carefully closed his notebooks and prepared for bed, the most transformative opportunities arrived disguised as impossible choices. Victoria's partnership offer might represent exactly that kind of pivotal moment, the chance to transform careful survival into genuine prosperity, one calculated risk at a time. The decision came to Marcus on a Wednesday morning in November. As he pushed his janitorial cart through the empty hallways of the downtown office building, where autumn sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like possibilities waiting to be seized. He'd been carrying Victoria's partnership proposal in his mind for 2 weeks, turning it over during his cleaning rounds, examining it from every angle during late-night Uber drives, testing its weight against his accumulated caution about opportunities that seemed too good to be true. Sophia had provided the final push the night before, in her characteristically direct way. "Daddy," she'd said while he tucked her into bed, "Mrs. Victoria called again today. She sounds sad when you don't call her back." The observation had hit Marcus with unexpected force. He'd been so focused on protecting himself and Sophia from potential disappointment that he'd failed to consider how his indecision might affect Victoria, who had invested significant time and resources in evaluating his technology based on genuine belief in its potential. Now, standing in the empty office building where he'd worked for 8 months, Marcus pulled out his phone and dialed Victoria's direct number before his habitual caution could reassert itself. "Marcus?" Victoria answered on the second ring, her voice carrying relief and anticipation. "I was hoping you'd call. I've been thinking about your offer," Marcus said, abandoning the elaborate explanation he'd prepared in favor of directness. "If the terms are still available, I'd like to accept the partnership." The silence on the other end lasted long enough for Marcus to wonder if the connection had dropped. Then Victoria's voice returned with unmistakable warmth. "Marcus, that's wonderful news. When can we meet to discuss implementation details? I need to give 2 weeks' notice to my current employers." Marcus replied, already calculating the logistics of transitioning from survival-focused work to the kind of meaningful engineering he'd abandoned 3 years earlier. "After that, I'm completely available." "Perfect. I'll have my legal team prepare the partnership documents, and we can start planning development timelines. Marcus, I think we're going to build something extraordinary together." After ending the call, Marcus stood for several minutes in the empty hallway, trying to process the magnitude of what he'd just committed to. The decision felt simultaneously terrifying and inevitable, like stepping off a cliff while trusting that wings would appear during the fall. 2 weeks later, Marcus walked into Victoria's office building for the first time as a business partner, rather than a potential investment opportunity. The 15-floor elevator ride felt different. No way wasn't visiting someone else's world, but entering a professional environment where he belonged. The thought was both exhilarating and slightly overwhelming. Victoria met him in the reception area, her smile genuine and enthusiastic, as she guided him toward a conference room that had been converted into a temporary development workspace. Computer workstations lined the walls, and a large table displayed enlarged versions of Marcus's hand-drawn schematics alongside professional CAD software renderings that translated his concepts into precise technical documentation. "Welcome to Aquatech Solutions," Victoria said, gesturing toward the setup. "Our new company, with you as Chief Technology Officer and majority stakeholder." Marcus studied the professional-grade equipment and software with something approaching awe. After 3 years of designing on kitchen tables with pencil and paper, the resources suddenly available to him felt almost overwhelming in their sophistication and potential. "This is incredible," Marcus said, running his fingers along the edge of a computer workstation that probably cost more than he'd earned in the previous 6 months. "When do we start?" "We already have," Victoria replied with evident satisfaction. "I've hired 2 mechanical engineers and a manufacturing consultant to work under your direction. They're eager to meet the inventor of the technology they'll be helping to develop." The afternoon brought Marcus's first formal meeting with his new team. Jennifer Walsh, a mechanical engineer with experience in humanitarian technology development. David Chen, a systems integration specialist who had worked on water purification projects for developing nations. And Patricia Santos, a manufacturing consultant who specialized in designing production processes for emerging markets. Marcus felt his familiar anxiety about professional interactions with credentialed engineers, but Victoria's introductions emphasized his role as project leader and technical visionary, rather than focusing on his unconventional background. The 3 team members seemed genuinely excited about working on technology they described as innovative and potentially transformative. "Your modular redundancy approach is brilliant," Jennifer said, studying the CAD renderings of Marcus's filtration system. "I've never seen water purification designed this way, but it solves every reliability problem I've encountered in field deployments." David Chen nodded agreement. "The user interface concept is particularly impressive. Most humanitarian technology fails because it assumes users have technical training they don't actually possess. Your design appears genuinely foolproof." The professional validation felt surreal to Marcus, who had grown accustomed to having his engineering background treated as irrelevant ancient history rather than valuable expertise. But as the meeting progressed and technical discussions became more detailed, Marcus found his confidence returning with surprising speed. "The biggest challenge will be optimizing the manufacturing process," Patricia Santos observed, reviewing component specifications. "We need to balance cost efficiency with reliability while maintaining simplicity for field maintenance." Marcus leaned forward, his engineer's mind engaging with the problem-solving process he'd missed more than he'd realized. "What if we design the manufacturing process to mirror the modular philosophy of the system itself? Instead of trying to optimize one complex production line, we could create multiple simple manufacturing streams that can operate independently." The suggestion sparked an hour-long technical discussion that left Marcus feeling energized in ways he hadn't experienced since his aerospace days. Working with competent colleagues on challenging problems, contributing expertise that was valued and respected, felt like returning to a part of himself he'd thought was permanently lost. Over the following weeks, as autumn turned to winter and development work accelerated, Marcus established a routine that felt both foreign and familiar. His days began with Sophia's morning routine breakfast, getting her ready for school, dropping her at the daycare where this unlikely journey had begun, then continued with technical meetings, design reviews, and prototype development work that utilized skills he'd feared were obsolete. The partnership with Victoria had included provisions for Sophia's childcare that eliminated the constant anxiety about pickup times and late fees that had characterized Marcus's previous work arrangements. Emma and Sophia's friendship had deepened to the point where their after-school activities were often coordinated, giving Marcus additional flexibility for longer workdays when development deadlines required extended focus. Emma asked if Sophia can come to our house for a sleepover this weekend. Victoria mentioned one evening, as they reviewed progress reports in the conference room that had become their informal headquarters. "If you're comfortable with that arrangement." Marcus looked up from the manufacturing timeline he'd been studying, surprised by how natural the suggestion felt. 6 months earlier, the idea of Sophia spending the night at the home of someone he barely knew would have been unthinkable. Now, Victoria felt like the kind of trusted friend whose judgment he didn't question. "Sophia would love that," Marcus replied. "She talks about Emma constantly, and I think she's curious about seeing your house." The girls' friendship had become one of the unexpected joys of the business partnership. Their different personalities, Sophia's exuberant enthusiasm and Emma's thoughtful observation, complemented each other perfectly, and both children seemed to thrive on the intellectual stimulation they provided each other. "They're quite a pair," Victoria observed with obvious affection. "Emma's vocabulary has expanded dramatically since she started playing with Sophia. Yesterday, she used the word precipitation correctly in a sentence about weather patterns." Marcus smiled, remembering Sophia's recent fascination with advanced scientific terminology that she'd learned from Emma. "Sophia asked me to explain photosynthesis last week. I'm not sure where she picked that up, but she was determined to understand the complete process." The easy conversation about their daughters highlighted how naturally their family lives had become intertwined through the business partnership. Marcus had worried initially about maintaining appropriate professional boundaries, but Victoria seemed to view their collaboration as encompassing both technical development and the practical realities of single parenthood. 3 months into the development process, Marcus encountered his first significant challenge from within Victoria's broader business network. The quarterly review meeting included several of Victoria's investment partners' successful businesspeople whose financial backing made the Aquatech Solutions development possible but who had not been involved in the initial technology evaluation. Richard Castellanos, a venture capitalist with a portfolio of technology investments, studied Marcus with obvious skepticism as Victoria presented development progress and budget projections. The man's expensive suit and casual confidence suggested someone accustomed to making snap judgments about people based on superficial indicators. "Victoria," Castellanos said during a break in the formal presentation, his tone carrying patronizing concern, "I need to understand the personnel decisions here. You're asking us to invest significant capital in technology being developed by someone with no current industry experience." Marcus felt his shoulders tense as Castellanos continued, without acknowledging his presence in the room. "I understand the humanitarian appeal of this narrative, but business decisions should be based on competence rather than charitable impulses." Victoria's expression hardened slightly, though her voice remained professionally controlled. "Richard, Marcus has more relevant experience with water purification systems than most engineers in this field. His aerospace background includes direct work on life support technologies that are far more complex than anything required for terrestrial applications." "Aerospace work from 5 years ago," Castellanos replied dismissively. "Technology moves fast, Victoria. What he knew then might not be relevant to current manufacturing and deployment requirements." The exchange was happening as if Marcus weren't sitting 3 feet away, a dynamic that reminded him uncomfortably of job interviews, where potential employers had discussed his qualifications in the third person while questioning whether his skills were current enough to warrant consideration. "Perhaps," Marcus said quietly, interrupting the conversation, "you'd like to review the technical specifications and performance data, rather than making assumptions about competence based on employment history." Castellanos turned toward Marcus with obvious surprise, as if he'd forgotten that the subject of their discussion was actually present. "I'm sure your technical work is adequate, Mr. Rivera. My concern is about leadership capability for a multi-million-dollar development project." Before Marcus could respond, Jennifer Walsh spoke up from across the conference table. "Richard, if I may, I've worked with engineering teams at 3 different humanitarian technology companies. Marcus's technical leadership and problem-solving capabilities are exceptional by any standard I've encountered." David Chen nodded agreement. "The modular redundancy concept we're implementing is more sophisticated than anything I've seen in 10 years of water systems development. Marcus isn't just competent, he's genuinely innovative." The support from his engineering team felt gratifying, but Marcus recognized that Castellanos' skepticism represented a broader challenge he would likely face throughout the development process. People who judged capability based on resume credentials rather than actual performance would always question whether someone with his background belonged in leadership roles for significant technology projects. The opportunity to definitively answer those questions arrived 3 weeks later, when the development team encountered a technical problem that threatened to derail their prototype testing timeline. The integrated control system that managed communication between different purification modules was experiencing intermittent failures that no one could diagnose, despite extensive troubleshooting. "The communication protocols are solid," Jennifer reported during an emergency team meeting. "Each module works perfectly in isolation, but when we integrate them into the full system, we get random communication dropouts that cause processing errors." David Chen had spent 2 days analyzing system logs without identifying the source of the problem. "The error patterns don't match anything in the technical documentation. It's like the modules are interfering with each other in ways that shouldn't be possible based on the design specifications." Patricia Santos looked frustrated as she reviewed manufacturing data. "We've checked component quality, assembly procedures, and calibration protocols. Everything tests within normal parameters, but the integrated system fails unpredictably." Marcus listened to the team's reports, while studying system diagrams on his laptop, his mind working through the logical architecture of the control network. The problem they were describing sounded familiar, though he couldn't immediately place where he'd encountered similar symptoms. "Can you show me the communication timing charts?" Marcus asked, moving to the whiteboard where David had mapped out the data flow between modules. As David walked through the timing sequences, Marcus felt recognition dawning. The error pattern was identical to a problem he'd encountered years earlier while working on satellite communication systems, where multiple devices sharing limited bandwidth created interference cascades during high traffic periods. "The issue isn't with individual modules," Marcus said, beginning to sketch timing diagrams on the whiteboard. "It's with network congestion during peak processing loads. The communication protocol we're using assumes each module will transmit status updates at regular intervals, but when all modules are processing simultaneously, the network becomes oversaturated." Jennifer frowned as she studied Marcus's diagrams. "But the bandwidth calculations show we should have adequate capacity for all modules operating at maximum load." "Theoretical calculations assume perfect timing," Marcus replied, adding more detail to his sketches. "But in real-world conditions, modules don't transmit exactly on schedule. Small timing variations create clustering effects where multiple modules try to transmit simultaneously, causing collision cascades that propagate through the entire network." The explanation made sense logically, but David Chen looked skeptical. "If that's the problem, why didn't our network analysis software identify the congestion patterns?" Marcus smiled, remembering similar debugging sessions from his aerospace days. "Because standard network analysis tools assume the timing variations are random. But these aren't random, they're correlated with processing loads in predictable ways. The clustering happens during specific operational conditions that standard diagnostics don't test." He turned to the whiteboard and began sketching a modified communication protocol. "We need adaptive timing that adjusts transmission schedules based on network load. Instead of fixed intervals, each module monitors traffic and transmits during detected quiet periods." Patricia Santos studied the proposed solution with growing interest. That would add complexity to the control software, but it would eliminate the bandwidth competition entirely. "Actually," Marcus said, continuing his sketches, "it simplifies the overall system by eliminating the need for centralized traffic management. Each module becomes self-regulating instead of depending on external coordination." The team spent the rest of the afternoon implementing Marcus's solution, modifying control software, and testing the revised communication protocols. By evening, they had achieved stable operation across all modules, with no communication failures during extended testing. "Remarkable," Jennifer said as they reviewed test results. "Not only did you identify the root cause, but your solution actually improves system efficiency beyond the original specifications." David Chen looked impressed despite his initial skepticism. "How did you know to look for correlated timing variations? That's not covered in any standard networking textbooks." Marcus felt a flush of professional satisfaction at successfully applying expertise he'd feared was obsolete. Satellite communication systems face similar challenges, but with much higher stakes. When you're managing life support networks in space, you learn to think about failure modes that Earth-based systems don't typically encounter. Word of Marcus's diagnostic success spread quickly through Victoria's business network, reaching Richard Castellanos within days. The venture capitalist appeared at the development office that Friday, ostensibly to review progress reports, but clearly interested in reassessing his evaluation of Marcus's technical capabilities. "Victoria tells me you solved the integration problem that was stalling prototype development," Castellanos said, his tone noticeably more respectful than during their previous encounter. "The team solved it," Marcus corrected diplomatically. "I just recognized a failure pattern from previous experience with similar systems." Castellanos studied the technical documentation with obvious interest. "This adaptive timing protocol is quite sophisticated. I don't think our other portfolio companies have implemented anything comparable." The acknowledgement felt like vindication for Marcus, proof that his engineering expertise remained valuable despite the unconventional path that had brought him to this opportunity. But more importantly, it represented acceptance from Victoria's business partners that could smooth future development challenges. As winter progressed into spring, the Aquatech Solutions prototype evolved from laboratory demonstration to field-ready technology. The successful resolution of the communication problem had accelerated development timelines and attracted attention from humanitarian organizations eager to test innovative water purification systems. Dr. Sarah Kim, who had participated in the initial technology review, arranged for the first field trial through her connections with Doctors Without Borders, a refugee camp in Jordan, housing families displaced by regional conflicts, provided the perfect testing environment for technology designed to operate under challenging conditions with minimal technical support. "This is exactly the kind of deployment scenario we designed for," Marcus explained to Victoria as they reviewed preparations for the field trial. "Unreliable power, untrained operators, contaminated water sources, and no possibility for complex maintenance procedures." Victoria nodded, though Marcus could see anxiety in her expression. What if something goes wrong? What if the system fails under conditions we didn't anticipate? "Then we learn from the failure and improve the design," Marcus replied with confidence that surprised him. "That's how engineering development works: iterative testing and refinement until you achieve reliable performance under all anticipated conditions." The field trial began in March, with Marcus and Jennifer traveling to Jordan to oversee installation and provide initial training to camp personnel. The experience of seeing his technology deployed in actual humanitarian conditions felt surreal to Marcus, a realization of purposes that had motivated his work for 3 years but had always seemed abstract until now. The refugee camp water engineer, a woman named Fatima, who had managed water systems in multiple displacement situations, studied the Aquatech prototype with professional skepticism. "How many people can this system serve?" she asked through a translator. "About 500 people per day with continuous operation," Marcus replied, watching as camp technicians began connecting the modular units to existing water storage infrastructure. "But the modular design means you can scale capacity by adding additional processing units." Fatima examined the control interface, which displayed system status through intuitive color-coded indicators rather than complex readouts. "My staff are not engineers. Can they operate this system without extensive training?" Marcus smiled, remembering his 4-year-old daughter's role in designing the user interface. "The controls are designed to be understood by anyone who can operate a microwave oven. Basic operation requires about 30 minutes of training, and maintenance procedures are documented with pictures rather than technical text." Over the following week, Marcus observed as camp personnel learned to operate the water purification system with remarkable efficiency. The modular redundancy design proved its value when one filtration unit developed a minor malfunction, allowing the system to continue operating while repairs were completed during normal working hours rather than requiring emergency intervention. "This is unprecedented," Dr. Net. Kim observed during her visit to evaluate the trial results. "I've never seen humanitarian technology adopted this quickly or operated this reliably by non-technical staff." The trial data exceeded Marcus's most optimistic projections. The system processed water more efficiently than specified, required less maintenance than anticipated, and achieved reliability rates that surpassed established technology by significant margins. More importantly, user feedback indicated that camp personnel felt confident operating and maintaining the system independently. "The real test will be long-term reliability," Marcus cautioned as they prepared to return to Austin. 6 months of continuous operation will provide much more meaningful data than 1 week of supervised testing. But the initial results were encouraging enough to attract attention from international development organizations. Within days of Dr. Sayce Kim's preliminary report, Aquatech Solutions received inquiries from UNICEF, the World Health Organization, and several private foundations interested in funding expanded field trials. Victoria's excitement was palpable as she reviewed the flood of interest from potential customers and partners. "Marcus, I think we're approaching the tipping point where this technology transitions from promising prototype to proven solution." The international attention culminated in an invitation for Marcus to present Aquatech Solutions technology at the Global Water Innovation Summit in Geneva, a gathering of humanitarian organizations, technology companies, and development funding agencies that represented the most prestigious platform in their field. "This is extraordinary," Victoria said as she forwarded the invitation email. "The Innovation Summit typically features established companies with proven track records. Getting invited to present after one field trial is unprecedented recognition." Marcus felt a familiar mixture of excitement and anxiety as he contemplated addressing an international audience of water systems experts and humanitarian leaders. The presentation would represent both validation of his technology and potential access to the kind of global partnerships that could transform Aquatech Solutions from startup to major player in humanitarian technology. The irony wasn't lost on him that 3 years earlier he'd been struggling to find janitorial work that provided health insurance, while now he was preparing to address world leaders about technology he'd developed at his kitchen table during stolen moments between survival-focused jobs. That evening, as Marcus helped Sophia with her homework while reviewing his Geneva presentation notes, his daughter looked up from her coloring book with characteristic directness. "Daddy, are you famous now?" she asked, apparently having overheard phone conversations about international conferences and technology demonstrations. Marcus laughed, smoothing her hair with the kind of casual affection that had become natural between them. "Not famous, sweetheart. Just busy helping people have clean water." "Like the butterfly project you've been working on?" The description made Marcus pause, uncertain how butterflies related to water purification systems. "What butterfly project?" Sophia pointed to her coloring book, where she'd been carefully drawing intricate patterns that looked remarkably like system diagrams. "The water machine has patterns like butterfly wing slots of small parts that work together to make something beautiful." The 4-year-old's metaphor was surprisingly accurate, Marcus realized. The modular redundancy design did resemble butterfly wing structures, with multiple independent components that created functional beauty through collaborative operation. "You're right," Marcus told his daughter, marveling at her perceptive observation. "It is like butterfly wings, many small parts working together to create something that can fly." As Sophia returned to her coloring, carefully adding details to patterns that echoed the technology Marcus had spent 3 years developing, he reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. The accidental Daycare mix-up that had introduced him to Victoria, the recognition of potential in work he'd thought was purely theoretical, the gradual transformation from survival-focused survival to meaningful engineering contribution. The boy, who had once been deemed insufficient by someone who couldn't recognize value, was now preparing to present humanitarian technology to international leaders, while his daughter grew up seeing engineering innovation as natural part of their daily routine rather than impossible dream. Sometimes, Marcus thought, as he watched Sophia work on her butterfly patterns, the most important changes began with the smallest connections, building through careful collaboration until they achieved the kind of transformative potential that could lift families from struggling survival to genuine prosperity. The Geneva presentation was still weeks away, but Marcus could already feel the momentum of success beginning to reshape their possibilities in ways that honored both Maria's memory and Sophia's future potential. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, supported by partnerships that valued competence over credentials and innovation over conventional assumptions about who deserved opportunities to change the world. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Aquatech Solutions headquarters, a gleaming 12-story building in Austin's tech corridor that had become a symbol of humanitarian innovation and business success. Marcus Rivera stood in his corner office on the top floor, reviewing the final details of the contract that would fundamentally change global access to clean water, while below him the city hummed with the energy of a technology hub that had embraced his company as one of its crown jewels. The document on his desk represented 5 years of relentless development, testing, and deployment. A $500 million contract with the United Nations Development Program to implement Aquatech water purification systems across 47 countries over the next decade. The numbers were staggering: technology capable of serving 12 million people annually, preventing an estimated 2.3 million deaths from waterborne diseases, and establishing sustainable water infrastructure in regions that had never experienced reliable access to clean drinking water. "The final signatures are confirmed," announced Jessica Martinez, Aquatech's Chief Operating Officer, as she entered Marcus's office with a folder of execution documents. The UNDP board approved the contract unanimously. Implementation begins next month with the pilot deployments in Bangladesh and Kenya. Marcus accepted the folder with hands that remained steady despite the magnitude of what they were finalizing. 5 years earlier, he'd been emptying trash cans in this same building as a nighttime janitor, worrying about late pickup fees at Sophia's daycare. Now he was signing contracts that would transform humanitarian infrastructure on a global scale while providing financial security he'd never imagined possible. "Thank you, Jessica," Marcus replied, his voice carrying the calm authority that had developed as Aquatech grew from startup prototype to international leader in water purification technology. "Please make sure the engineering teams in Jordan and Guatemala receive immediate notification. They'll want to begin scaling production schedules." After Jessica left, Marcus stood alone in his office, surrounded by awards, patents, and photographs documenting Aquatech's evolution, from kitchen table sketches to technology deployed in 32 countries. The view from his windows encompassed the city where he'd once driven Uber through late-night streets, calculating whether surge pricing would cover Sophia's daycare fees and rent for their cramped apartment above the laundromat. His phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. "Sophia's piano recital starts at 7. Emma's been practicing all week to surprise Sophia with a duet arrangement. Don't be late, Sophia." The message brought Marcus back to the personal realities that grounded his professional success. Despite Aquatech's remarkable growth and his transformation into a recognized leader in humanitarian technology, the most important constants in his life remained Sophia's happiness and the deep partnership he'd developed with Victoria that had evolved far beyond their original business collaboration. That evening, Marcus sat in the front row of Roosevelt Elementary School's auditorium, watching as his 9-year-old daughter approached the piano with the confident poise that had replaced the shy uncertainty of her younger years. Sophia wore a dark blue dress that Maria would have loved, her hair arranged in elaborate braids that Emma had taught her to create during their frequent sleepovers. Beside him, Victoria held 2-year-old Michael on her lap while Emma waited backstage for her surprise duet with Sophia. Their son Marcus still felt a flutter of amazement when he thought about their blended family clapped enthusiastically as Sophia began playing a complex piece that demonstrated remarkable skill for her age. "She's extraordinary," Victoria whispered, her pride evident as Sophia's music filled the auditorium with surprising sophistication. "The piano teacher says she's progressing faster than students twice her age." Marcus nodded, remembering Sophia's fascination with patterns and systems that had emerged during their early days at the laundromat apartment. Her musical talent seemed to spring from the same analytical mind that had helped him design user interfaces by testing them on her 4-year-old logic. Now, at 9, she approached piano composition with the same systematic thinking that characterized her approach to mathematics and science. The surprise came when Emma joined Sophia on stage, carrying a violin that gleamed under the auditorium lights. The two girls exchanged a glance of shared excitement before launching into a duet they'd apparently been rehearsing in secret, a classical piece arranged for piano and violin that showcased both their individual talents and their remarkable ability to collaborate. "They planned this together," Victoria murmured, her voice thick with emotion as she watched their daughters create something beautiful through partnership and trust. "Emma's been taking violin lessons for months without telling us, just so she could surprise Sophia with this performance." The music was stunning, but Marcus found himself equally moved by watching the friendship that had begun 5 years earlier during a confused daycare pickup. Sophia and Emma had grown into young women who supported each other's ambitions, celebrated each other's successes, and created joy through collaborative achievement. Their bond had become the foundation for a blended family that felt as natural and permanent as anything Marcus had experienced. After the recital, as they gathered in the school lobby among other proud parents, Marcus felt Sophia tug on his sleeve, with the determined expression that usually preceded important announcements. "Daddy, Emma and I want to enter the state science fair together," Sophia declared with characteristic directness. "We're going to design a water filtration system for schools, using some of the same ideas from your company, but simpler for kids to understand." Emma nodded enthusiastically from beside Victoria. "We want to help schools that don't have clean drinking water, like the places where Aquatech works, but smaller." Marcus exchanged a glance with Victoria, both recognizing their daughter's project as evidence of how completely their lives had become intertwined through shared values and collaborative aspirations. The girls weren't just best friends, they were partners in imagining solutions to problems they'd learned to care about through watching their parents work. "That sounds like an excellent project," Victoria said warmly. "Would you like help with the research? Or do you want to develop your ideas independently?" "We want to do the science ourselves," Sophia replied seriously. "But maybe you could help us understand how to test our design properly." The conversation continued as they walked to the parking garage. But Marcus found his attention drifting to the larger implications of what he was witnessing. Sophia was growing up in a world where engineering, innovation, and humanitarian purpose felt normal, where complex problem-solving was family dinner conversation, and where collaboration with Emma represented the kind of partnership that could achieve remarkable things. The contrast with his own childhood, marked by financial uncertainty and limited opportunities, felt almost surreal. Sophia would never experience the desperate calculations about rent and groceries that had defined Marcus's early years as a single father. More importantly, she was developing the confidence and capabilities to contribute meaningfully to solving problems that mattered globally. 3 days later, Marcus stood at the podium of the International Technology Innovation Conference in San Francisco, addressing an audience of entrepreneurs, investors, and engineers who had gathered to hear about breakthrough developments in humanitarian technology. The conference represented the pinnacle of recognition in his field, and his keynote presentation was titled "Second Chances and Unexpected Pathways: How Crisis Can Catalyze Innovation." 5 years ago, Marcus began, his voice carrying easily through the packed auditorium, "I was working 3 jobs to support my 4-year-old daughter while drowning in medical debt from my wife's cancer treatment. I cleaned office buildings at night, drove for rideshare services in the evenings, and took construction work on weekends, anything that provided steady income and health insurance." The audience listened with respectful attention, though Marcus could sense their curiosity about how his current success had emerged from such challenging circumstances. "During those difficult years, I designed water purification systems in my spare time, mostly late at night at my kitchen table, after my daughter was asleep. The work felt like an impossible dream, a way to honor my late wife's environmental passions while channeling my engineering background toward something meaningful." Marcus paused, scanning the audience that included venture capitalists, technology leaders, and humanitarian organizations from around the world. "I never imagined that those sketches would become the foundation for technology now deployed in 32 countries, serving over 8 million people annually." He clicked to a slide showing Aquatech systems operating in refugee camps, rural villages, and disaster relief zones, images that represented the practical impact of theoretical work that had begun during his darkest period of financial and emotional struggle. "The transformation didn't happen because of exceptional vision or unique talent," Marcus continued. "It happened because circumstances forced me to approach problems differently than engineers working within established systems. Financial constraints required innovative solutions. Personal desperation motivated relentless focus. And most importantly, an accidental encounter with someone who recognized potential where I saw only survival opened doors I hadn't known existed." The story of his accidental meeting with Victoria through the Daycare mix-up drew appreciative laughter from the audience, though Marcus could see that many listeners were recognizing deeper implications about opportunity, partnership, and the unexpected ways that meaningful connections could transform lives. "The lesson isn't that crisis automatically produces innovation," Marcus explained, advancing to slides that showed Aquatech's development timeline and global deployment data. "The lesson is that Circumstances we perceive as limitations can become advantages if we approach them with creativity and remain open to partnerships that expand our capabilities. He spent the remainder of his presentation detailing the technical innovations that had emerged from designing within severe resource constraints, the business model that prioritized humanitarian impact alongside commercial viability, and the collaborative approach that had enabled rapid scaling from prototype to global deployment. Today, Aquatech Solutions employs over 400 people across 15 countries, Marcus concluded. But our success isn't measured primarily by revenue or market share. We measure success by the number of lives improved through access to clean water, by the communities that achieve sustainable water independence, and by the proof that engineering innovation can serve humanitarian purposes while building economically viable businesses. The standing ovation that followed felt simultaneously humbling and validating recognition from peers who understood the technical challenges of what Aquatech had achieved, but also acknowledgement of the broader message about resilience, partnership, and the transformative potential of unexpected opportunities. During the networking reception that followed his presentation, Marcus was approached by dozens of entrepreneurs, investors, and engineers eager to discuss collaboration opportunities, technical details, and the business principles that had guided Aquatech's development. The conversations felt surreal to someone who, 5 years earlier, had been declined for entry-level engineering positions due to his employment gap and outdated industry connections. "Your presentation was remarkable," said Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a water systems engineer from MIT who had followed Aquatech's development since the early Geneva demonstrations. "But I'm particularly interested in your comments about partnership and recognizing potential in unexpected places. That seems central to your success story." Marcus nodded, thinking about Victoria's willingness to invest in technology developed by someone society had written off as unemployable. "I think the most transformative opportunities often come from connections that don't follow conventional networking patterns. My business partners saw potential where traditional investors saw only risk, and that recognition changed everything." "Is she here?" Dr. Bisus Rodriguez asked, glancing around the reception with obvious curiosity. "I'd love to meet the venture capitalist who recognized your potential before it was obvious to others." Marcus smiled, checking his phone to confirm his flight schedule. "Actually, she's in Austin with our children, managing a school science fair project that our daughters are developing together." "That tells you everything you need to know about our priorities and partnership." The comment drew an appreciative laugh from Dr. Rodriguez, who seemed to recognize the deeper message about balancing professional achievement with personal relationships and family responsibilities. 2 days after returning from San Francisco, Marcus drove through the familiar Austin neighborhoods that had once represented the limits of his geographic world but now felt like chosen home territory. The route to Sunset Memorial Park followed streets where he'd once driven Uber passengers while calculating whether surge pricing would cover late fees from Sophia's daycare. Now he made the same journey in a different context, visiting Maria's grave to share news about achievements that had exceeded every hope they'd discussed during her final months. The cemetery in early spring was peaceful and verdant, with live oak trees providing shade over grave markers that told stories of completed lives and enduring love. Marcus had visited regularly over the 5 years since Maria's death, but today felt differentless about grief and more about gratitude for the foundation she'd provided for everything that had followed. Maria's headstone was simple granite, engraved with her name, dates, and a quote she'd chosen during her final weeks. "The best way to find yourself is to lose yourself in the service of others." Below the inscription, Marcus had added fresh white Rochester favorite flower sand, a small framed photograph of Sophia at her piano recital, radiant with confidence and artistic achievement. "Hi, beautiful," Marcus said quietly, settling onto the grass beside the grave, with the comfortable familiarity of someone maintaining an ongoing conversation across the boundary between life and memory. "I brought pictures from Sophia's recital. She played that Chopin piece you loved, and Emma surprised everyone with a violin duet they'd been planning in secret. He placed the photograph where Maria could see it, if such things were possible, then continued with the update he'd been mentally composing during the drive from downtown. The UN contract came through $500 million over 10 years to provide water systems globally. Remember how we used to talk about work that could help people who didn't have resources we took for granted? Your water purification ideas are going to serve 12 million people annually. The magnitude of the achievement still felt surreal when stated simply, but Marcus knew Maria would understand the deeper significance of humanitarian technology scaling from theoretical concept to global implementation. Sophia's growing up to be remarkable, just like you always said she would, Marcus continued, his voice carrying the mixture of pride and wistfulness that characterized these visits. She's brilliant at piano, excellent at mathematics, and she wants to design water systems for schools with Emma as her science fair partner. She remembers you through the stories I tell her, and she knows that everything we've built honors your belief in using engineering to help people. A gentle breeze moved through the oak trees, creating shifting patterns of sunlight and shadow across the grass around Maria's grave. Marcus interpreted the movement as encouragement to continue, though he recognized the projection as his own need for connection rather than supernatural communication. "I need to tell you about Victoria," Marcus said, addressing the conversation he'd been postponing for months. "She's become much more than a business partner. We love each other, deeply and completely, and we're building a life together that includes all our children. I hope you'd approve of her. She's brilliant, ethical, and she loves Sophia like her own daughter." The admission felt both necessary and slightly guilty, though Marcus knew rationally that Maria would want him to find happiness and partnership rather than preserving solitary grief as tribute to their marriage. "We have a son together, Michael, who's 2 now, and has your eyes and my stubborn determination. Sophia adores him, and Emma treats him like the little brother she never had. We're a blended family that works beautifully, built on the foundation of values you taught me about putting relationships before individual achievement." Marcus placed his hand on the cool granite of Maria's headstone, feeling the physical connection to permanent memorial while acknowledging the temporal distance that separated their shared past from his continuing future. "Most importantly, I want you to know that Sophia will never want for anything," Marcus said, his voice growing stronger with the certainty of the promise he was making. "Not just financially, though the business success ensures her education and opportunities. But more than that, she's growing up surrounded by people who love her, in a family that values service to others, with access to resources and support that will enable her to pursue whatever dreams she develops." The conversation with Maria's memory continued for another 30 minutes, covering Sophia's friendship with Emma, Aquatech's upcoming deployments in Southeast Asia, and Marcus's plans to establish an engineering scholarship at the University of Texas for students from low-income families. He told her about the house he and Victoria had purchased together, a sprawling property with enough space for children to play safely and gardens where Sophia could grow the vegetables Maria had taught her to love. "I miss you every day," Marcus concluded, "but I'm no longer defined by that loss. You gave me the foundation to build something meaningful from the worst circumstances, and now I'm using that foundation to create opportunities for other people facing similar challenges. Sometimes, the wrong turn really does lead to the right destination." As Marcus prepared to leave the cemetery, he felt the familiar mixture of sadness and resolution that characterized these visits. Maria remained part of his story, but her memory had evolved from defining limitation to inspiring motivation, reminder of the values that should guide his choices rather than the grief that had once paralyzed his possibilities. The drive back through Austin took Marcus past landmarks that marked his family's journey from struggling survival to secure prosperity. The apartment complex above the laundromat where he and Sophia had lived during their most difficult period, the office building where he'd worked as a janitor while developing water purification designs at night, and finally Sunshine Daycare, the small converted house where a simple mistake had catalyzed the most important transformation of his life. The daycare looked different now, upgraded with new playground equipment, fresh paint, and expanded facilities that reflected the financial support Aquatech Solutions had provided as part of their community investment initiatives. A small plaque near the entrance acknowledged major donors who had enabled the improvements, with Marcus and Victoria's names listed alongside established Austin philanthropists and technology leaders. Marcus parked in the familiar lot where he'd once rushed to avoid late pickup fees, now returning as a major benefactor whose success story had become part of the Daycare's promotional materials for prospective families. The irony wasn't lost on him that the place where he'd once felt inadequate and financially precarious had become a symbol of how completely circumstances could transform through unexpected connections and sustained effort. Inside, the afternoon pickup routine continued with the controlled chaos that characterized the intersection of children, parents, and childcare logistics. Marcus and Victoria had arranged to meet here with Michael and Emma's younger brother David, a 6-month-old infant, whose care they shared between their demanding professional schedules and commitment to hands-on parenting. "Daddy," Sophia called out as she spotted Marcus near the entrance, running toward him with the unrestrained enthusiasm that remained constant despite her increasing sophistication and academic achievements. "Emma and I calculated the water flow rates for our science fair project, and we think we can build a prototype that processes 50 gallons per hour." Emma appeared beside Sophia, both girls clutching notebooks filled with sketches and calculations that reminded Marcus of his own early design work. "We want to test it with the fountain in the playground," Emma announced. "Mrs. Henderson said we could use the outdoor spigot for experiments as long as an adult supervises." Victoria emerged from the toddler room carrying Michael, who immediately reached for Marcus with the confident expectation of a child accustomed to being welcomed enthusiastically by multiple parental figures. Their blended family felt natural in ways that would have seemed impossible when Marcus first arrived at this daycare as a desperate single father worried about late fees and employment stability. "How was the cemetery visit?" Victoria asked quietly, her tone carrying the gentle concern that characterized her approach to Marcus's ongoing relationship with Maria's memory. "Good," Marcus replied, accepting Michael's enthusiastic hug while watching Sophia and Emma compare notes about their water filtration project. "Peaceful. I told her about the UN contract and Sophia's recital, and about how remarkably well everything has worked out." Victoria nodded understanding, having learned that Marcus's cemetery visits represented healthy connection to his past rather than inability to embrace their shared future. "She would be proud of what you've accomplished. What you're both accomplishing together," she corrected, including Sophia in her assessment. Mrs. Henderson approached their family cluster with the warm smile that had welcomed Marcus during his most difficult period and now greeted him as one of the daycare's most successful alumni parents. "Mr. Rivera, I wanted to thank you again for the new playground equipment," she said, gesturing toward the elaborate climbing structures visible through the windows. "The children absolutely love the water play area, and several parents have commented on how the design encourages collaborative play rather than individual competition." Marcus felt gratified that Aquatech's donation had been implemented thoughtfully, reflecting the same principles of accessibility and user-centered design that characterized their humanitarian technology. "We're grateful for everything this place provided our family during challenging times. Supporting early childhood education feels like completing the circle." As they gathered children and belongings for the transition to evening family time, Marcus found himself reflecting on the 5-year journey that had transformed every aspect of their lives. The daycare mix-up that had introduced him to Victoria, the recognition of potential in work he'd thought was purely theoretical, the gradual evolution from business partnership to romantic relationship to blended family success story. Outside in the parking lot, as they transferred car seats and backpacks between vehicles with the efficient coordination of experienced parents, Sophia made an announcement that surprised both adults. "Emma and I want our water project to help kids like we used to be," Sophia said, her 9-year-old seriousness evident as she buckled herself into the car seat she was rapidly outgrowing. "Kids whose families don't have enough money for clean water, like we didn't have enough money for some things before Daddy's company became successful." Emma nodded agreement from Victoria's car. We research schools where kids get sick from bad water, and we want to design something simple and cheap that could help them stay healthy." The declaration demonstrated understanding of their family's journey, that Marcus hadn't realized Sophia possessed awareness that their current prosperity had emerged from genuine struggle, and recognition that engineering innovation could address problems faced by people still experiencing the difficulties they had overcome. "That's a beautiful goal," Victoria said warmly. "How can we help you develop your project effectively?" "We want to visit one of Daddy's water systems that's working in a real place," Sophia replied with characteristic directness. "Not just see pictures, but understand how the technology actually helps people who need it." Marcus felt a flutter of paternal pride at Sophia's desire to understand the humanitarian impact of Aquatech's work, rather than simply accepting its commercial success. "We could arrange that," he said, already thinking about deployment sites that would provide educational opportunities without exposing the children to dangerous conditions. As they drove through the Austin evening toward the family home, they now shared a house with space for piano practice, science experiments, and the kind of childhood exploration that felt impossible in their cramped laundromat apartment. Marcus marveled at the completeness of the transformation that had begun with such a simple mistake. 5 years earlier, he'd been a desperate single father picking up the wrong child from daycare, worried about late fees and wondering how to cover rent. Now, he was part of a thriving family business that served humanitarian purposes while providing financial security, married to a woman who had recognized his potential when no one else could see it, and raising children who understood engineering innovation as natural extension of caring about other people's welfare. The accidental daycare mix-up had indeed led to the wrong destination, but wrong in the most perfectly right way possible, catalyzing connections and opportunities that had transformed struggling survival into meaningful prosperity, individual limitation into collaborative achievement, and hidden potential into global impact that honored both Maria's memory and Sophia's boundless future possibilities. Sometimes, Marcus thought as he watched Sophia and Emma plan their science fair project through the rearview mirror, the most important destinations could only be reached through paths that seemed like mistakes at the time. The wrong child, picked up on the wrong day, had led to exactly the right. Life a reminder that transformation often began with small errors in routine that opened doors to possibilities too extraordinary to have been planned intentionally. As their 2 cars turned into the driveway of their shared home, Marcus felt the quiet satisfaction of someone who had learned that the most beautiful stories often began with the simplest confusion, grew through patient partnership, and flourished into outcomes that exceeded every reasonable expectation about what might be possible when hope met opportunity at precisely the right moment. The journey from desperate single father to successful entrepreneur and devoted family man had taken 5 years, but it had begun with 30 seconds of inattention during a routine daycare pickup, proof that sometimes the most profound changes started with the smallest mistakes, especially when those mistakes brought together people who were meant to build something extraordinary together.